Hello everyone, I'm Extra Cheesy 87, and this is Let's Play Reflections for Cold Steel 4. It's finally time to discuss the game in all its glory. I've been putting on making this video for a little bit just because it's kind of intimidating. There's a lot to talk about. For those who are not familiar with these style of videos, basically they're long discussion videos that are more in line with a podcast than a video essay. I have notes to guide me, but for the most part, some of the stuff we're talking about, a little off the dome piece, and I do have a lot of notes. I got about 20 pages of notes to guide us through here. So it'll probably be a longin'. Video's basically going to be in three major parts. We'll start with just straight story talk, where we kind of go through the story in roughly chronological order, talk about everything that happened, things I liked, things I didn't like, maybe how I think about things differently after having beaten the game and gotten some distance between them, or how future events may have improved or worsened some aspects of the story that I couldn't speak on at the time during the Let's Play. Then we'll have some like overall analysis of the game, kind of talk a little bit about the themes of the series and my thoughts on the overall saga a little bit. And then we get to the fun part of the video to wrap things up, which is speculation on the future and theories on the final super-de-duper cutscene of Doom of CS4. That's very easy to find. It's totally not hidden or nothing, because the people who make this series aren't like psychopaths or nothing like that. Alright, I think we will go ahead and jump in without further ado. So I guess before we start talking about the prologue, though, we'll talk about my thoughts going into CS4. I had somewhat mixed expectations overall. My general vibe was that people who like CS3 love CS4 and vice versa. People who didn't like CS4 or CS3 hated CS4, or at the very least, if you didn't like CS3, then you didn't like CS4. So I liked CS3 overall, but I was kind of disillusioned with the climax, and I think it was poorly handled from a storytelling perspective. Just the whole vibe of like, nothing makes any damn sense, we're not going to explain shit, and nobody's going to like question it. Like, I don't know. Without getting too bogged down into the ending of CS3, let's just say I was not super enthused on the storytelling of the climax. Now, the events of the climax I was interested in. I liked the setup for CS4, if nothing else. So there was a mix of reservations over not being super happy with the way the climax is presented, in terms of, you know, like the Oliver death that I didn't feel was handled well, especially just because it reeked of a fake out. Osborne, his speech making zero freaking sense, stuff like that. But still excited to see how CS4 played out, just to kind of see how the story comes to a conclusion for the most part. And also the prospect of returning characters is very interesting. Speaking of returning characters, let's get into the prologue. Definitely the best intro of the series, like without a doubt. Like, none of the others are not even close. And it's not just because of the fan service. The fan service is definitely a big part of it. Like, the intro doesn't work as well if it's not characters that you're, you know, already care about. But I do think the intro actually has a strong advantage over all the previous immediate intros that you see in like Zero, CS1, and CS3, is that they aren't flash forwards. You know, this is something that's happening kind of concurrently with the plot, or it's, you know, bridging the gap between CS3 and the start of CS4. So it gets you right into the action of the game without actually having to potentially spoil any of the future plot developments, which is an issue that CS1 and CS3, I think, ran into it the most, just because those are actual playable sections that lasted for a decent period of time. Zero's intro, to a degree, does spoil some stuff, but it's also super short, and you don't play anything, so it doesn't stick in your mind as well. You know, there's a reason that, like, when films and stuff do, like, in media res openings, usually the openings are only, like, a couple minutes long, because you're kind of, like, they're intended to engage you, and then you're supposed to kind of forget about them. They're not supposed to, like, stick in your mind forever, whereas the CS1 opening and CS3 openings kind of stick in your mind because it's your initial introduction to, like, how to play the game and everything. and since they're longer, they're harder to just kind of forget. So throughout all of CS1, you're just kind of like waiting for, okay, when do they go to Grelia Fortress? When do they go to Grelia Fortress? And then when you get to Grelia Fortress, you're like, oh, we know what's going to happen here. Same with CS3 and Juno. When you go to Ortis, you kind of know exactly what's going to happen eventually. It's not like a major issue, but it does, I think, detract a little bit from those sections when you know what's going to happen, because they're not a surprise. You know, the attack on Grelia Fortress would have been hard to be a complete surprise, just because... Well, actually, no, you don't know that it happens in Azure. There's a vague reference to the idea that the guns are pointed at Crossbell during Azure, but nothing along the lines of there actually being like a military operation there. So that would have actually come as a surprise, even if you hadn't played Azure. But of course, it doesn't come as a surprise because you see it in the opening. So the opening dream sequence, it's weird. I like it. It makes literally no sense at all. But it is kind of interesting. I mean, the main reason it doesn't make any sense is that Yuna, Kurt, and Altina should have no idea who the hell Instructor Mary or Makarov are, like what they look like or their personalities. Like, they may have like a general idea that they exist. Like, maybe Reen has mentioned them off screen. Which is possible, but the idea that they like know what they look like and their personalities and everything is like a little weird. And I kind of thought maybe there'd be more to that whole idea of like the interconnecting of minds there, like of them having like a shared dream, but nothing really ever comes with a dream sequence in the opening. Then you have the walking around the village and talking to everyone, which I kind of liked. The main standout there is Eustace, you know, kind of reflecting on Milliam's death, you know, having the hat and trying to give it to Altina, which is a really nice moment. Then you have Yuna's speech, which is kind of, it's a mixed bag, but it's more leaning towards the good. It's like a mostly good bag with like a little, like some, it's like a bag of chips. It has like some really good full-size chips, but you got like the crumblies at the bottom. You're like, you know, I know what's gonna happen, but it would be nice if all the chips could be like big, nice triangular pieces of deliciousness. Because the main cool parts of the speech, I like it when characters show emotion and get like righteously mad, because I do think that's something the series or the CS games needed a bit more of. Like, I want characters to get freaking mad, man. Everyone's too happy all the time. They're all like, oh, we're so forgiving. Nah, fuck that. Get mad. And so Yuna kind of having a bit of an emotional outburst there is cool. There is an element of, like, it does feel like she's kind of blaming old Class 7 for not doing anything during that time, which I don't think is really supposed to be I think the message there is that they should have been trying to step in and, like, be there for Reen during the time after CS2. But it does kind of, like, the speech itself feels like she's roasting them for like sitting around moping around. When, like, really I think the focus of the scene should have been just on the idea that despite being Reen's friends, they weren't really there for him when he needed them. Now, of course, at the same time, that's a two-way street, right? You can't exclusively blame old Class 7 for not being there when Reen is, like, pushing everyone away or, like, pretending that he's alright, when he's really only ever shown himself to be, like, emotionally vulnerable to Toa during the course of the series. So it does kind of make some sense for them to kind of, you know, like, not want to push Reen and have him talk about something that it seems like he doesn't want to talk about. But overall, I mean, I do like the scene. I think is good. And more characters be more mad. That's how I feel. And plus it just really fits in with Yuna's character. So it's a bit of like character reinforcement there. Then you have training with Randy. Great. Big fun. Randy's the best. The only problem, one of the main problems of CS4, not enough Randy. Randy should have been in all of Act 1, I think. Then you can have him like go away, I guess. But like if Randy had been there for like the instructor stand-in for all of Act 1, oh man, that would have been so pog. I do also like how in the prologue your levels are reset, just to kind of like have... I love it when gameplay kind of ties into story like that, so having characters be depicted as being weaker by actually having their levels be nerfed and then they're restored back for when you actually begin the game. That's cool. It's a small detail, but I do like it a lot. Going into Act 1, you know, I really like having Randy at the start. Would have been great if he'd been there for the entirety as like the instructor replacement. And you do get him for most of like Act 2 and 3. So, or I guess you get him. You don't have him for all of Act 2. You get him at the end of Act 2 and you have him for all of Act 3. So that's pretty cool. But yeah, it would have been nice to have him like in a more like canon story position as opposed to just being like a dude you can bring along who'll like say a couple lines every once in a while. But at the same time, you know, Randy's a returning character, so he's not going to be like the focus of the game or anything, so I get it. Even if he is the best. So then you have like the stuff in St. Arc. The stuff about like everything that happens in St. Arc isn't really all that interesting. If I'm being completely honest, you just kind of like go around St. Arc and you like talk to people. And it's a little engaging just because there's like, ooh, you know, how's the curse affecting everyone? And then you learn that the curse doesn't really do anything. It's just, you know, it's more flavor than anything. Because like nobody actually, and this is something we'll talk about a bit later, but one of the, I think, flaws of like some of the, or even maybe flaw isn't really the right word for it because there is a reason for this. But it, you know, you never, despite Class 7 supposed to be like fugitives from justice, and everyone is supposed to be under the influence of the curse, nobody ever really like reacts negatively to Class 7. Like everyone's just like, hey, Class 7, gosh, go googly goo, sure do love you guys. There's like 2 people in the entire game that are like, ooh, Class 7 bad. But we'll talk about that later. We'll talk about that some more later on when it makes more sense when we get to Raquel, but you go into Hamel at the end of the first section of Act 1, though, is a standout moment. And honestly, I think that scene with Ash is maybe my favorite in the entire series. There's several reasons why it's great. A, I like how everyone's involved. Like, all 4 characters kind of chip in to do the tag team friendship speech. In that sense, I think it's better than the final friendship speech at the end of the game, where when you get to the Imperial Fortress, right? Where it just being 4 characters, it felt like everyone was taken apart, but it wasn't quite to like the level of absurdity where you have like 20 different characters saying one line and then passing the card to the next person, basically. It being each person kind of saying their piece and trying to break through to Ash is really cool. It highlights Ash and Kurt's friendship, right? Where Kurt gets to kind of have like a more active role, and it shows their dynamic between each other, where despite Kurt being a more passive character who isn't really the type to get emotional, he gets up, he does exactly what Ash needs to hear. He, you know, grabs him by the collar and tries to shake some sense into him. And so I think Kurt kind of acting a little out of character there shows how much he actually cares and how like they are really friends. And just in general, I really like the Ash Kurt dynamic, where it's very similar to Eustace Machias, but it's not quite as tropey. Because it's not the whole, we hate each other, but now we're like kind of best buds at the end of the day. It's like, they never really hated each other. It's just they have a little bit of personality clash, but, you know, they always are kind of getting along for the most part when you see them in CS3. And so I think that makes their friendship feel pretty realistic, right? Where they clash a little bit and Kurt is able to say exactly what Ash needs to say. Another aspect is just Ash being there in Hamel is really cool, because it shows his remorse over what he did. You know, this kind of, he can't escape Hamel, and just like how it drove him to shoot the Emperor, and how he's still kind of soul searching over that. So there's like a great display of remorse by him just being in Hamel, and his like continuing search for his own identity. And it's made even more impactful when you get to the Ghosts of Hamel quest at the end of the game, where Ash is truly able to put his past to rest and accept that he's Ash and he's not Johann, right? Because there's several times throughout the series where he says, you know, I'm Ash from Raquel, I'm not from Hamel, but he doesn't really mean it until the end of the game when he says it during the Ghost of Hamel quest. And I think the fact that he instinctually returns to Hamel instead of Raquel, like, underlines that point. So that's just really good. Then you have the reintroduction of Gilbert, which is cool and funny, especially since, as I mentioned, I think in the Let's Play, I had kind of forgotten Gilbert existed until like the day before I recorded that video, because for some reason I was rewatching a part of, I think it was when I was recording the Reflections video for CS3. I think I'd already started playing CS4 at that time, and I had rewatched the cutscene at the final star door of Sky 3 with the Anguis talking, and Gilbert's in like the very start of that, right, where he's like on the Glorious and lamenting the fact that Campanella is going to shock him for all time. And so I was like, oh man, I completely forgot about Gilbert. What a character. He'll never show up again. And then, you know, the next day I go to record, Gilby shows up. His boss fight in the mod, also, I guess for people who maybe didn't watch the Let's Play that might be watching this, whenever I'll talk about combat a little bit in this video, for context, I played through the game with a difficulty mod, so my like thoughts and experiences on the combat are not necessarily going to be the same as someone who just played vanilla, i.e. certain fights are going to be, when I talk about them, are going to be much harder. Gilbert's one, where the Gilbert fight is like pretty difficult, partially just because of like, you know, my whole like no grinding, no doing any battles meant that I had like no equipment on anyone, so like base level equipment was under leveled, which levels don't matter that much in the game. They're kind of impactful at the start just because you can be missing crafts, and those initial stat upgrades are when they're most important because your quartz are ass. Since I was still basically using like action 1s and attack 1s for like up until part 3 of Act 1 basically. But like Gilbert's just like, it's a really wacky fight with him doing the Grail Burst, and the way his like the final section works where he enhances, then he starts healing you and you're very confused about what the hell is going on. But it's just a really cool section, and I like how wacky it is in the mod. It kind of helps create some difference in the combat, just because like the Trails games are a little guilty of like every boss fight kind of being the same. Like even though the base level mechanical game design is very strong when it comes to the fights, the actual design of the fights themselves isn't necessarily the best. Or it could, you know, it suffers from being a little samey. Then you fight Rutger and Zephyr, which is cool. You know, it's the only time you ever actually fight all of them together, which is weird, as we'll talk about when we get to the second rivalry later on. It does kind of suck that it's more of like a joke fight than like a real fight, considering you just like press your S-Craft buttons and they die, basically. I do like the dialogue there with Ash and Fee, right, where they talk about when, you know, Ash has his moment of slight vulnerability where he talks about how, you know, he is scared inside, but he just isn't going to allow himself to show it. Same with Fee, which is cool. It's a kind of line that I feel like Crow, for instance, should have had. If we kind of, because really in a lot of ways, Ash is like what I wanted from Crow when it comes to like him showing contrition and slight amounts of vulnerability during his storyline, whereas Crow just kind of constantly maintains the I'm a cool dude facade, to the point that it doesn't even feel like it's a facade. It feels like he actually just like doesn't come across as like that caring of a person, especially considering that, you know, he never like apologizes for anything and downplays his actions constantly, and nobody ever calls him out on it. But we're not going to rant about Crow in this video, maybe. Okay, we'll rant a little bit, but not because of Crow, but for some other reason related to Crow. But that's later on. We'll get there. We'll get there. I promise. I promise. Then you bring back the rest days with the conclusion of part 1 of Act 1, which was cool. I do like how each of the original new Class 7 members get to be the main character for a bit, and the way it kind of correlates with the upcoming section. You start with Kurt. Now, Kurt doesn't have that much of a connection to going to Raquel and everything. I mean, there's like, you fight Cedric at the end, so there's like a very like tenuous connection there, because that's like an important fight for him. But in terms of the relationship that the next two rest days have, with like Yuna and going to Crossbell and Altina and going to the Black Workshop, Kurt's doesn't feel like, it feels like there's the least connection there, but it's still cool. And I liked the kind of return of the mini rest days. I do think it would have been nice to have like some actual bond events. Now, not necessarily like bond events where you get points and you're gated, and you get like, you know, bonding points out of it, but like just kind of, maybe you were forced to cease to like hang out with some of the characters to actually progress the story, instead of it just being like, you can go back into your room instantly, right? Because really, if you're not going to talk to NPCs, there isn't anything to do on those rest days. I think it's like Altina's has a quest and that's it. I don't think there's a quest in Yuna's. I don't remember if Kurt actually gets a quest. I can't remember. But really, it's like if you're not interested in that, there's like nothing to do in the rest days though. So having a few like kind of forced bond events where, you know, Kurt hangs out with Ash or something like that would be kind of neat. You kind of get them if you talk to the characters, but having them be a bit more fleshed out would have been nice. The next section of Act 1 is kind of a mixed bag. I do like the introduction of new areas pretty early on into the game. You know, you get the Valley area, or the Milsante Hills area. Avon Hills? Yeah, that's what it's called. Which is cool because it's kind of reminiscent a little bit of the Nord Highlands. Getting into Milsante, which has a nice vibe, even though it's kind of like I mean, the town has like 6 people in it, so it's nothing really that interesting to it, but it is pretty. Going to Raquel with Ash is cool, kind of a missed opportunity though, because this is the part where the fugitive aspect should feel the strongest, right? Where Ash, you know, is like he's got to be in disguise because, you know, who knows what the town thinks of him, and then every NPC you talk to basically just recognizes Ash anyway and says, good on you for shooting the Emperor, buddy. I mean, not really, but they may as well. It would have been kind of interesting though if it had been all these characters who supported Ash were now like shunned him because of the curse. It would have made the curse feel like it was like not just some random thing that was thought up and then tacked onto the story. If it actually kind of had like some sort of role there. Because it's basically, I mean, it's just like, you have it with like Ash's friend a little bit, but I don't know. It would have been better if it had been more people. Or even if it was just that like, there was more lines in general. And this is not necessarily just about the Raquel section, but just like, the whole like being a fugitive as a whole. There have been more situations where you overheard NPCs talking about these class 7 terrorists and stuff like that, and you know, these the Radiant Wings, or because I mean that would be the propaganda line, is that the Radiant Wings are, you know, a terrorist organization, or at the very least, you know, they may not necessarily want to call attention to the Radiant Wings and the idea of, you know, there's a new Courageous flying around. But, you know, Class 7 would have been known of by all these places that you go by because you interacted with them in CS3. If there had been, like, kind of just overhearing conversation about being surprised at them being terrorists or, you know, wanted criminals and stuff like that, it would have, I guess, helped sell that idea more that the world is hostile to you now because of the curse. Or that, like, you know, everyone is falling under the influence and changing their personalities. Now, the main reason why that doesn't happen, is of course that a large part of the series is going around and talking to NPCs and exploring stuff, and that would be kind of hard to do if you, you know, if the world was truly hostile and you couldn't go into cities and stuff. So it's kind of like, I get why it doesn't happen, but it would have sold that idea better. Because it's kind of the same problem that CS2 had, right? Where all of Class 7 are wanted criminals by the government. Yet it never really like matters. You can kind of go and do whatever the hell you want, and like it's like it's you know, it's not even really like that much of a challenge to get into places or sneak into them. But yeah, it's not bad. It's just, you know, I think it could have been done a little bit better. Going to Ulster is really cool because there's been lots of hints about it in, you know, the side or the drama CD / side story, some of the references in CS3 and stuff. So going there's cool. It's got the best town theme in CS4, one of the best in the CS games. It's not quite Nord Highlands level or Legram, but it's up there. It's pretty good. Then you have the showdown at Osgiliath Basin, which also, you know, I remember talking about at some point about, ooh, you know, about like, I wonder if the, you know, Osgiliath has something to do with like, maybe that's where Osborn's formed, because, you know, Osborn and Gileath is, you know, Osgiliath is just a Lord of the Rings reference, I think, because there's a location in Lord of the Rings called Osgiliath, and I don't know if like what it's called in the Japanese version, if it's the same or if that's just like a translated Lord of the Rings reference, but yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what that's just supposed to be. No greater meaning there. I don't know. I recently rewatched the movies and I noticed when they mentioned an area called Osgiliath. I'm like, hey, I know that. I recognize that word. But yeah, I don't know. So we gotta mention that. But yeah, back to the actual game itself. It's kind of like a mixed bag. Story-wise, I didn't really like the stuff with Muse at all. Revealing Muse to be a galaxy brain super being was very lame to me. Like, I mean, the stuff she says is so fucking ridiculous that I predicted the Civil War when I was 6 years old, and not just predicted the Civil War, but knew that my uncle was going to be the one to cause it, and that he would lose the Civil War and destroy House Kyan in the process when I was 6. Like, shut up. Just please shut up. Stop talking. The fight with Cedric, though, is kind of cool from a gameplay perspective. It's definitely the hardest fight in the game, at least under the narrow circumstances in which I fought it, which was being 20 levels lower than you're supposed to be, no weapon upgrades, action 1s and action 2, or action 1s and attack 1s on everyone, only one character having a fully upgraded weapon, made beating the time condition, also having Elliot instead of like Sarah or Fee, they beating the time condition like really fucking hard and inconsistent, but I had fun at the end of the day. It's a very memorable combat section. Just for like the length that it took for me to actually get the first win, and then having to redo it again because the game audio fucked up. Fun times. There is the issue though of like the pretext for the fight is like really dumb as well. The reveal that the Panther Girl was actually there the whole time is like the stupidest shit ever. If I'm being completely honest, like I could buy it if like they had to fight to buy time for the Panther Girl to get there, and then when Cedric's like, I'm going to use my Divine Knight, then the Panther Girl makes it there. But the idea that it was there the whole time, just invisible, and they risked having Muse fight fucking Shirley, of all people. Like, it's not like, I mean, if we were being like realistic, right, wouldn't have been that crazy a coincidence for one of Shirley's bullets to just like go astray and blast Muse in the face. It's like there's no reason for them to start that fight there when they could have avoided it by having the Panther Girl there. It's just, I don't like that whole, the Panther Girl was there the whole time, look how smart Muse is nonsense. Bad. Then you have the Unireste. I remember nothing about it, but you go back to Crossbell, and that's cool. Big fan of the Crossbells. I'm trying to remember what happens in Crossbell. Okay, I'm pretty sure plot-wise nothing happens in Crossbell, but it's cool to go back. You do get to go to Michelin. That's nice. That was a pleasant surprise. I did not expect Michelin to get brought back, and especially getting like fully brought back was really nice. You do have the thing with the Emperor prior to that when you go to St. Ursula. That was kind of cool, even though the Emperor is like a big loser boy. Seeing Ash kind of interact with this character was nice, to see more of that like remorse and contrition over what he did, and it kind of advances Ash's storyline a little bit. Then you have the triple fight with Sharon, Lecter, and Campy. It's a cool one. Yuna's got some good lines towards Campy, kind of advancing that dynamic between the two of them. And it's the fight of the end of act fights. It's the one that makes the most sense. Because really there is kind of like, I mean, I guess like there is an element of like, why the hell is Gilbert in Hamel? Like, I mean, I guess in theory, do they even know about the singularities? I guess in theory they do. But, or like, are they trying to capture Ash? Like, I don't know. I can't remember why Gilbert's supposed to like be there to ambush them. It feels like kind of a contrived, like a person shows up to do a boss fight. Similar with Cedric. At least Cedric there's an element of like, okay, yeah, trying to ambush and capture Muse, that makes sense. You know, the fact that they just like know you're there is kind of whatever. But at least with, you know, Rufus, Sharon, and Campy already being there, it's because they're guarding Rufus while he does the trial. So it kind of makes sense for them to be there ahead of time like that. Trying to think, anything else worth mentioning? The fact that Campy can be deathblowed at 1% is funny. You know, Maki is fucking sending him to the Shadow Realm. That was a good moment. I enjoyed that. Then you have the reveal of Rufus being the 7th Awakener. I would say it wasn't unexpected. I was somewhat slightly surprised though, just because I thought Rufus's dialogue in CS3 implied that either he was already an Awakener, or that he knew who the final one was, which I guess he did. He knew that he was, you know, destined to be the final Awakener. They just hadn't found the spot yet, that he was, you know, been, I guess, promised that he was going to get to be the Auric Knight's Awakener. So I was like, I guess, semi-surprised by Rufus in that sense that he hadn't already become an Awakener. Then you have the fight against him. Main takeaways, Eustace has some good dialogue there if you bring him. Then you have getting rescued by Lloyd and Estelle, which is cool. I guess going back to the Crossbell stuff, I was a little disappointed that that scene where Estelle and Ellie rescue you while you're running from the sewers. It would have been really cool if you'd actually gotten a playable fight section there against Sal, because I'm still mad that the game hasn't let me fight Sal yet. Like, come on. What the hell? It's been 5 games. This dude's just been begging to get his ass kicked. Instead, they're like, oh no, fight McBurn for the 7th fucking time. No! Fight Dooley. No, I want to fight Sal. He's not even that cool, but the longer you make me not fight him, I guess makes him kind of cooler, which is good, I guess, in a way. One of these days, Sal, coming for you. But back to the future, with Lloyd and Estelle rescuing you. It's one of the few rescue scenes I don't mind, because it does feel like you're legitimately kind of like outnumbered there, and Lloyd and Estelle are fucking cool, and seeing Lloyd just one-shot the Zalber Soldat because he's a badass is nice. Then you also have the Blue Blanc reveal as well, which is like super cool. The way that's done is like fantastic, with all the overall foreshadowing if you've done the NPC stuff, both in CS3 and in the immediacy of CS4, right? Where, you know, when you talk to Alistair, he's talking about meeting an old friend and stuff. And even just the name of his character, like Alistair kind of supposed to be, I assume that's supposed to be a reference to like Alistair Crowley, who's like a, you know, real life magician arcana type, you know, alchemist-y person, very similar to like what Blue Blanc is supposed to represent with his like magic and everything. So that's kind of cool. I definitely probably should have caught on to it. So anything that like truly surprises me like that, like, props for that. And I think that is a good example of like the level of subtlety that a lot of the character revelations and reveals should have had. Another from CS4 that I think is like poorly done in contrast is Diana, where the initial hint is really good, like the picture on the mantelpiece is great. And Yuna does have the one line about how she thinks she recognizes Diana. I was kind of thrown off by that just because it's like you see that line right after you meet up with Beryl for the first time. You know, she doesn't say she looks familiar prior to that. So I was kind of thinking maybe there's like some connection there. But then the game does like just beat you over the head with the fact that Diana is Ellie's mom, like, because the initial reference is really cool and subtle, and then they just like beat you over the head with it to the point that you're like, okay, I get it, shut up. All right, okay, I get it. I don't think the question I never really remembered is to go, I recognize the picture when we saw it, when it's like first seen. I don't remember, is that picture actually shown in the Crossbell games? Because I remember when I saw it thinking it looked familiar. I don't know if I actually said it or not, because I was kind of like, oh, I don't want to say this looks familiar and make it seem like I'm just making stuff up if it's never shown up before. Because it did seem familiar to me, and it would be interesting if that actually picture did show up in some form or fashion in Zero or Azure. Or another example, just going back to, you know, the level of subtlety at play with Blue Blanc's reveal, it would have been kind of like how the reveal that Osborn's not dead should have been. Like, if you, of course, you know, if you play Azure, you know it because Azure's credits are bad and they spoil too much. I mean, I guess technically you could argue they're not spoilers because it's intended information, but I do think it takes some of the dramatic weight out of future revelations when you're just kind of told to them in about 4 sentences at the end of a game. But yeah, so if you hadn't played Azure, Osborn being dead, or not being dead, could have been like a really cool surprise, but they do also have that scene in CS2 where Claire like winks at the screen and just basically tells you that Osborn's not dead. Yeah, I do think there's more, like, the series could use more subtlety in that regard. And it's been kind of a mixed bag, where I think there has been like some really great subtle reveals, like Wiseman in Sky 1. Now that could have just been being dumb. I don't know. Wiseman being evil fucking surprised the hell out of me. Yakum is decently, if he hadn't have been so similar to Wiseman, he wouldn't have been that sus, I don't think. But the fact that he walks in, he's a doctor, and he looks like Wiseman, you're like, huh, he kind of reminds me of Wiseman. And then you're like, this fucker's evil, isn't he? Yup. But alright, let's keep on track with CS4. The final Black Workshop rest, or the pre-Black Workshop rest day is cool. You know, just the rest days in general. I do kind of wish there had been more, like, I guess connecting back to the idea that the rest days are supposed to be, like, the characters you play as are supposed to connect to the rest days. Would have been interesting if there had been more, like, Cedric Kurt stuff back during the Osgiliath Basin thing, but, you know, it's whatever. It's not, like, a huge problem. Then, moving on to Fragments, where we take a sip of the sauce and some water for a second. Alright, Fragments. It's a cool and hype section overall. I do have some quibbles with it in the end, both in terms of gameplay and story. So, the gendered parties, to start things off, is a little weird. I guess gendered with the exception of Sarah, who gets to be one of the dudes. It's kind of like a weird thing they do. I don't really get it. They do the same thing in the Pantagruel. I don't know. It's just kind of odd. I don't really have anything else to say. I thought that was weird at the time and still. Like, I don't know. Reen breaking out on his own is pretty cool. I enjoyed that. Or something that I expected. Okay, I kind of just like completely blanked there for a second. Like, because, you know, when you see him in that initial scene, you can see that his sword is right there in the same room as him, which is like big, you escape from this room, hey, your weapon is like literally right next to you. It's like a classic, you know, you've been captured scenario where your equipment is in a chest right next to your cell or something like that, which is always kind of dumb. It's especially egregious here because the sword is literally in Reen's room with him, and there's like, oh, we got like a strap on it. He'll never be able to break through this. Then you introduce Catgirl Celine, which I don't like. It feels like pandering, and it doesn't make any damn sense, because it actually makes way more sense for her alternate form to be like a evil demon panther. I mean, not evil, but like a monstrous like panther, kind of like the way when you see like monster Grianos. It would make sense because it would, you know, correlate to Grianos' alternate form, and it would make more sense about why Celine doesn't want to use that form and why it hasn't been used previously is because, well, she turns into like a kind of an uncontrollable beast, and she doesn't want to lose like her humanity, right? But it's a crisis situation, and basically Reen is going on a rampage so she can go on a rampage with him. And plus the idea of Demon Reen running around with this Demon Panther companion is like the fucking hypest shit imaginable. Don't tell me you don't think that shit isn't cool, alright? And also, you know, Roselia's alternate form, when she's like the holy beast, right? Like, none of them, you know, their alternate forms are always like beast-like, except for Celine, who gets to be a cat girl because anime. Crow and Duvally helping out Reen, that's great, and it's a cool prelude to their, well, I mean, Crow you always knew was coming back, but Duvally was a slight surprise later on when she joins the squad. Well, her joining the squad was a pretty big surprise, like as like a semi-permanent playable character. The idea that she might turn wasn't like super crazy, but then you get to the initial triple boss fight is fine. You know, the main issue with them is that who the fuck takes Angelica and George seriously as a fight? Like, come on, they're jokes. Like, story-wise, now the fights are decently hard with the difficulty mod, but they are, like, very lame from a pure story perspective, or, like, considering that it's all the men of Class 7, essentially. Like George? Fucking George is supposed to, like, be a threat? No, shut up. The McBurn fight is really cool, though, because you get introduction of Sword McBurn, and he's got the backup of... Well, yeah, because that's the first time he uses Sword McBurn in combat, right? Or uses his sword in combat, I believe. It's hard to keep the McBurn fights, you know, straight in your head, because there's fucking 7 of them. And him being backed up by the other 2 members of the Star Raider is cool. It's, like, one of the last hard fights in the difficulty mod for a long time. Granted, the fight isn't that hard, really. It was just that I had no CP on Duvally, and the way the fight works in the mod is that you're supposed to instantly use her S-Craft. And I couldn't do that, so I just kept getting destroyed on the first turn, which was fun. Then we get to the Reen fight, and my complaints at the time are still completely valid of there either should have been a camp scene at the save point, or when it, it does the fade to black save, or it could be when they're walking into that room, there's a little walkway. If it had just been briefly playable and you popped a helium machine there, and it could be like, hey, you can immediately walk forward if you're ready, but if you didn't know that you're going to be forced into a fight with all of new class 7, who you maybe didn't set up because you're like, ooh, we just got all the party members we can use are now available. I want to use all the new party members and not a new class 7 because I've been using them for the last 30 hours. I want to use new characters. I'm going to give them all my equipment. In the game, basically mails a pipe bomb to you in response. Because how dare you not just try and use new class 7 all the time? They're the greatest. So, but really, like, the issue with that fight is that you go into it with whatever HP you had at the end of the Angelica and George fights. In my case, Yuna and Kurt had literally 1 HP. So on the first turn, they got one shot immediately, and there's nothing you can do about it. And then Altina had 0 mana. And I think Ash and Muse? I can't remember. Like, it was only 2 characters had any HP. It was just a fucking complete disaster. And several of the characters had literally no quartz. And your only option to change is to, like, redo the fucking boss gauntlet, which is ridiculous. And it could have all been avoided by even just, like, even a simple heal at the start. Because, I mean, the idea that you could go into that fight with, like, 1 HP on every single character and just, like, instantly lose in the first turn is, like, comical to me. And I don't even really buy the idea that, oh, well, that's, like, yes, it's made worse by the difficulty mod, but I don't buy that as an excuse for the bad design, because there are people who, like, play on the game in vanilla and aren't great at the games, so they could struggle too, right? I mean, difficulty is a relative concept, right? Plenty of people struggle with the game on, like, default hard or default normal, just out of, maybe not really wanting to spend the time to learn the mechanics or stuff like that. So I don't really find the level of difficulty be a defense of the poor design there. And the only reason I'm talking about this at so much length is that I still occasionally get comments that are from people who are, like, fucking malding over me being mad at this section in the Let's Play. And it makes me mauled in response. I mean, usually I just kind of ignore them, but and if they keep talking about it, for some reason, their comments stop showing up on my channel for some reason. Oh no, someone got fucking shadow banned. But yeah, going into the Reen fight is cool though. You kind of always knew they were going to do a Reen fight at some point in the series. Especially when they start doing the whole, like, demon Reen thing in that section. Well, initially when in the anime cutscene they have Reen with a mask, and they ended up not being an actual plot point. But I was kind of like, oh, they're going to have evil Reen and you're going to fight him as a boss. Because of course you want to fight Reen as a boss. And that's not the way they did it, but, you kind of always knew there was going to be a Reen boss fight at some point, for some reason or another. Then you have the Osborne Leanne fight, which is cool. It does also, like, completely blow up any idea that, like, oh, it's, the reason they don't heal you is because it would be... Like, I remember I got this one comment that it was so stupid about how the reason they don't heal you before the Reen fight is that it would be too hand-holdy if they did that, and they don't want to hold your hand, yet they heal you before the Osborne fight immediately after, to which they responded, well, there's no way you could know that the Osborne fight was going to happen, so of course they heal you. And it's like, what the fuck are you talking about? Oh my god, it's like, some people, like, just the mental gymnastics at times to defend, like, really minor shit just baffles me. Now, I completely lost my train of thought because I got tilted over, admittedly, well, it's not one person, admittedly just a few people, but yeah, the fight itself is cool. I don't really have too much to say about it. I do like the scene also going back, but the scene where Reen comes to his senses and has like all the voices when like his spirit crystal or whatever it's supposed to be. It was kind of just like a souped up version of the same scene from the Pantagruel in CS2. It's cool. I wouldn't have minded Spirit Millium if that had been her only appearance, right? If she just kind of shows up in that moment as like a last vestige to cheer Reen on before disappearing into the ether because actions have consequences and all that. But instead, Spirit Millium shows up and you can play fucking card games with her, because why not? Now, going past the actual gameplay fight against Ozzy and Arianrod, now, I guess one thing that does warrant mentioning, I didn't make this connection myself, but, you know, well, at the time, but, you know, there's some comments that pointed out that it is neat that with the revelation that Osborne is supposed to be Dreikel's, that Arianrod and him form a combat link, and it's like the only person they ever form combat links with. Now, at the same time, plenty of like random characters form combat links despite having like never met or talked before previously, so there's not really a ton of like meaning to the combat links, but it's a nice little detail. I'll give it that. Now, the whole like they just let Reen leave is kind of dumb. There is maybe a slight explanation for it because in a way Reen is like meant to, you know, make it to the final rivalry, right? Now, there's contradictions in this in a lot of ways that we'll maybe talk about later, mainly. But it really kind of undermines the hypeness of the scene of like, oh, you're outmaneuvering Osborne and like you're freeing Reen when they just kind of like let you leave. Like, they don't put up any real effort to stop you despite having you outnumbered and you're in enemy territory. Like, you just kind of fly out and then Osborne's like, haha, we shall meet again. It's like, okay. Like, I don't know, it just kind of undermines it. It doesn't even feel like we really won. It just feels like you just, like, let us leave. Because reasons. Then we move on to Act 2. We're 47 minutes in. We're just on Act 2. Holy shit. I thought we'd be, like, getting to the climax by now. Okay, at least with Act 2, there isn't as much to say. Because Act 2 is kind of fucking boring. Well, with the exception of the start and the end. First rivalry, pretty cool. I like going back to Brionia. Brionia is really cool. Big fan. The Crow Douvli is a fun fight. It was also the kind of first sign of Act 2 gameplay-wise being kind of easy. Which was, because really the only like hard fight in Act 2 are like the two cryptid fights. Like the Horse Magic Knight and the big other flame volcano man. I can't remember what it is. Is it like a turtle or something? I don't know. That's a cool fight, but it's also like completely destroyed by Usus or any character with like Allguard, which I didn't really use for the playthrough. That was my one exception, just because I really liked the way the difficulty mod used or changed Usus's ability. It was a very cool change, if extremely broken. But yeah, the Crow Douvli fight, it's cool. But it does kind of have the issue of being like a little like too easy, I find. But that's more of like a gameplay thing. We're not gonna. I don't want to talk about the gameplay too much, but I will make mentions of it. Now, the issue with the scene, the resurrection of Crow. We'll talk about it more later. But don't like it at all. Still, the scene itself is okay to good. My main issue is just like my problem with bringing back Crow is that it kind of weakens his actions in CS2, right? Like, I feel like that was one of the few things that CS2 did really well, which was killing off Crow, or like the way in which Crow story ended, at least, right? And so having him just like come back and be like, actions don't have consequences is I'm not a big fan of. Especially since the game starts this off by being like, well, you know, he's alive for now, but he'll totally die at the end of the game. And you're like, you're not going to kill him off. You don't have the fucking stones to do it. And you're like, yeah, we don't. We're going to bring him back. And so when it does happen, you're just like, why even pretend that you weren't going to bring him back? You know? I would have enjoyed it. Like, don't even have the pretense of, like, that you're not just going to bring back Crow because of, like, fan acclaim. I do think it does kind of, that scene between Rean and Crow does kind of show how, like, I think their relationship really should have been, like, honestly, canonically, like, the romance of the story. Just because, like, that is kind of one of the issues with Rean and Crow's, like, dynamic, is that if you don't do Crow's bond events in CS1, you don't really have that much reason to, like, give a shit about him. Like, the idea that Rean and Crow are, like, super good friends isn't actually that believable if you don't do his bond events in CS1. Now, I did his bond events because I was playing on, like, a New Game Plus save, so I could do all the bond events, but I would not have done his fucking bond events normally, especially since he doesn't join as a party member until so late in the game. Because it's kind of like a problem that I think he and Toa kind of have with, like, their initial, like, character development being locked behind bond events that you're not really incentivized to see because, well, they're not main characters, so they're just inherently a bit less interesting, at least at first blush. Because, of course, you want to spend your time hanging out with the characters that you know instead of, like, risking doing your limited bond events on characters that, you know, you don't know, that, for all you know, are not actually going to be a biggest part of a series as, like, the actual main characters who are playable. So, yeah, that just kind of, like, is a bigger issue where I think the whole, like, dynamic and relationship between Rean and Crow is... It's pretty good if you do all of his bond events, but if you don't, then it's not great. And it's kind of why I think it really should have just been, like, a straight, like, either have, like, more scenes between them where they get to be, like, all, you know, bros and everything, or actually just have it be, like, a canon romance. If you have to change genders to make that, like, more palatable to your audience, like, fine. I don't really, like, care either way, but, yeah, because I mean, I get why there's no romance there, because, you know, people would be mad probably, and you don't want to, like, risk angering the mob at all, but because the people who would like that are outnumbered by the people who would, you know, like, Molotov cocktail your HQ. Duvali joins a nice surprise. I definitely didn't really expect her to be, like, a big major party member like that. And her scene at the cabin is, like, one of my favorite joke/moments in the whole playthrough. The part where I say something along the lines of, oh god, I can't wait to slurp up Aryan Soul's soul like a freaking milkshake, and then the game immediately pans to reveal the Duvali's in the room. Just great. I'm a big fan of that joke sequence. I'm just sorry about the whole slurping up your master's soul like a milkshake. That's just a joke. Just kidding. So yeah, then we get into, like, the free roam sections, which I'll kind of talk about, like, in bulk here. I enjoyed them, but I do think they're the most superfluous of the free roam sections in the game, because I think they're the weakest in Act 2. Like, they're the weakest overall, and Act 2 has a severe pacing issue already. Well, it's not that the pacing is bad, per se, it's just that the events that happen in Act 2 aren't that interesting, because I just don't really care about, like, the rescue missions aren't that engaging, and the people you fight, more importantly, are not interesting. Like, it's hard to look forward to fighting fucking Claire. Ooh, wow, Claire. Like, whereas, like, the rivalries, for instance, when you're doing the talks before the rivalries, you're like, oh, at least we're building up to something cool, right? Whereas for that, it's like, oh, we're gonna rescue them, and we're gonna fight random side character. Oh boy, great. But yeah, and also maybe having it be, like, because I think maybe what you could do, if I were to, like, try and trim the game, I would have the free roam sections for Act 2 basically just be, like, you talk to everyone on the crew of the Courageous, and then you go to do the infiltration missions, and you have your talks there. And then just kind of, like, speed along that section. And I would also merge the Leaves and the St. Arc section together, where basically have it, instead of fighting the 4th Division at Dreknor Fortress, it's that the 4th Division are stationed in Leaves, and then when you're trying to liberate Leaves, you end up facing off against Elliot's dad and Nightheart. Instead of you're fighting students, you're fighting the actual, like, you know, forces occupying Leaves at that time, which would have been way more hype than, hey, fight a bunch of fucking children. They're really strong. Major Michael says they're just as strong as Class 7. Shut the fuck up, Major Michael. Like, you're kind of based, but, like, also, don't ever talk to me. But yeah, going back in time though to Ortis, Claire's scene when you're infiltrating Ortis is like whatever. Like I didn't care about fighting Claire and Angelica. I didn't care about Angelica being mind controlled. Does anyone care? I don't know. It's just a boring sequence. The only thing that makes it okay is that you get the toaster back. That's cool, even if, you know, there is the whole Angelica being weird during it. And then Claire also has that stupid line about how, like, she's like, if you manage to defeat me. Like, who the fuck are you? Who are you? Like, Claire's whole, like, shtick of, like, thinking that she's hot shit is so annoying. Like, I mean, she does the same thing at the end of the game with the, you're gonna have to bring out all the stops to defeat me and Lecter. And then it's like, no, I can beat you with one hand tied behind our back using freaking, like, Altina. I mean, Altina's, like, one of the most broken characters, but you know what I mean, right? We only need to use 4 characters to beat your ass. It's ridiculous. I did not like the stuff with Machias' dad, though, and how there's kind of that initial ambiguity of like, oh, you know, is Machias like supporting Osborn still or not? And then you learn that he actually was an outspoken opponent, and he's being kind of punished by being sent out to Ortis instead. But it also kind of shows that there's, you know, he still has like some level of influence. The fact that he's still able to maintain a position, right? He's not completely ousted is interesting. Then you have the St. Arc rescue mission. It's really boring. It does have the best climax, just because Elliot's dad and Neidhart. Speaking of which, does Elliot's dad have a fucking name? Like, because I'm pretty sure they only ever call him General Craig. Like, real talk, I don't know what Elliot's dad's first name is. Because they only ever call him, like, General Craig or Craig the Red. I don't actually know what his first name is. It's probably mentioned, but I do not know it. So until then, he's just Elliot's dad. But, yeah, that's like the coolest fight. It has the best post-fight sequence where for once in freaking history, Elliot's dad is based and he's like, nah, I got my ass kicked. None of this, oh, I wasn't really trying nonsense. He's like, nah, we got fucking mollywopped. Are you crazy? Freaking Elliot playing his damn song. Us can't do nothing, man. But yeah, the Lee's rescue, though, should have been combined with the St. Arc fight, or like, you know, have it be your fight in the 4th Division there. Just kind of cut all the St. Arc shit out. I feel like it's the most superfluous of it, and cut the whole fighting the students out because, like, I can't buy the students as a realistic threat at that point in the story. And the boss fight there is just super boring because it's like we already fought Ada and Fritz, and they were like joke parts of the Cedric fight. And the crew you're fighting with at the time is much weaker than the crew you have in Leaves, where you have basically almost like a full squad plus Reen and Randy. Like, come on. So then you move on to the climax of Act 2 with the Pantagruel. Very cool. Very, very cool section. Really, really enjoyed it. Just all the talking. It's really the game focusing on what it does best, which is like all the, you know, the large interconnected web of characters that the series has at this point. So focusing in on that is nice. And, you know, there's kind of a pretense of there being some political talk. Now, I think the actual, like, substance of the politics at play in the Pantagruel is, like, pretty small. It's not nearly as, like, and not that the conference in Azure is super in-depth, but it is definitely, like, a step back from there, where you don't really have, like, much real political discussion at play in the Pantagruel section, which is more just a sign of, like, Cold Steel in general not being interested in politics in the slightest, despite overtly being the most political of the games, which is just kind of a weird cross that they have, or a weird problem with the CS games in general, I feel. Is that, like, on paper, they should be the most overtly, like, political of the series, right? With how it's, like, focused on the government and, you know, ideological movements and rebels, and then it's just like they just kind of ignore all the substance of, you know, the political themes that are at play. To be like, the leader of the nobles, he's a fucking cartoon villain. You know, we set all this time up setting up the noble and reformers factions to be like, oh man, you know, the nobles seem like they have problems, but, you know, at the same time, the reformers faction, they are supporting Osborn, and Osborn is a dictator, so it's like, who knows? Maybe the nobles actually have, like, you know, maybe they have a point about opposing Osborn, and then their leader is a cartoon villain. Like, oh, okay, no nuance, got it. So going back to the Panticle, though, the actual Mille Mirage plan, I still kind of have the same issues where I think it's completely futile. At the time, I wasn't as against it because it kind of, like, it makes sense, right? I mean, these governments are always gonna like sit on their fucking hands and like twiddle their thumbs waiting for, you know, Reen and friends to do something. So I get that they're like, we need to have like an actual material plan to resist this invasion, right? That makes sense. Now, the problem with it is once you reveal, or it's revealed how to actually stop the Great Twilight immediately after this section at the Luna Shrine, it's like, okay, we know how to stop the Great Twilight now, like for reals, and stop the Great One. We should be doing that shit instead. Because the problem with Mille Mirage is that, like, I mean, they have that stupid line where Cassie's like, we have a 60% chance, or a 40% chance of winning, which is completely ridiculous, just based on, like, everything it's presented in the game. But they don't actually have a plan to stop, you know, the Great One. Right? Which seems to be a pretty big flaw. Like, even if they do magically somehow beat back the Empire and, like, fight their way to Heimdall, like, how do you deal with the Great One at full power? You don't. You just fucking lose, man. The plan's dumb. And really, it should have been as soon as we learned what to do with the Luna Sanctuary, Cassius and Aurelia should have immediately become playable characters, and they should have just started carrying everyone through the rest of the game. Now, would that be lame from a gameplay perspective? Yes. Would it make sense from a story perspective? Yes, it would. Then, oh yeah, another thing I want to mention about the Pantacles section, though, is it was kind of lame that Estelle didn't get a great speech. Like, she just is kind of like, we're bracers and we'll protect civilians. When Estelle was, like, the original queen of friendship speeches, right? Like, she has, like, still the best, like, friendship speeches of the entire series. So, I feel like Estelle was, like, very underutilized in CS4. Which is kind of like an issue with most of the returning characters. A lot of it is just fan service, and I get it. There's a lot of characters to juggle. And the, you know, original cast of Cold Steel is already way too big. So, like, trying to also balance, you know, a couple dozen returning characters is really hard. But there is definitely, I would have liked Estelle to have, like, a bigger, like, more impactful speech during that whole section. At least Lloyd's was good. And Reen's isn't bad. Then you have the Pantacle Invasion, which is a really cool section. I liked the, you know, the intermingling of the parties. The gendered stuff is a little weird still, but it's kind of whatever. The quad boss fight at the end is really cool. It's like the only extended multi-boss fight section that I really, really liked and think worked. Mainly just because each individual fight is cool and compelling, unlike, say, the pillars at the end where you're just fighting like random reskins. And they're all really short. Like, I think the combat section, it was like maybe 40 minutes with the mod, which isn't that bad. Whereas, say, to take like the pillars at the end of, or during the climax or the finale, that was like 90 minutes to do all 5 of those boss fights. So it was like a much less, like, you're not as bored. Or it doesn't feel as much as a slog, I guess I should say, because bored's not the right word. Because, I mean, it's still engaging, but... Then you have the cutscene after the boss fights, which is, like many things in the game, a mixed bag. On one hand, it's really cool to have, like, just a 50-minute long cutscene. Like, that's super, super cool. I hate Oliver being brought back. I still think it's bad. I just kind of wish, like, why even bother pretending to kill him in the first place? It added nothing really to CS3 because it felt so cheap and, like, not like it was really a thing. Because, I mean, I still, you know, just to briefly touch on it, like, the CS3 death of Oliver could have been, like, easily the most impactful moment in the entire series if it had been, like, for real and handled properly, but instead they give him, like, 2 lines and you're like, oh yeah, he's not dead. There's no way. Like, you're really gonna kill off, you know, the character that's been in the most games by giving him 2 lines? I don't fucking buy it. Like, and plus, you've already brought back Crow. If you're gonna bring back Crow, literally nobody can ever die again. Unless your name's Rutger. I guess Aryan and Osborn do die, but like, who cares? Then, you know, the cutscene and stuff is cool. There's some dumb stuff at play, like Laura's dad and the whole, like, weird mixed messaging with, like, it's the mask, but it's not the mask, it's the Twilight. But then you destroy the mask and he's free, so, I don't know, that's... I feel like it was just like, we want to make Laura have to fight her dad, and they didn't really like come up with a good reason for it. So it was just like, what if he had like a mask or something? But I don't know. Which, and I guess just add to the whole thing of like, the whole mask shit is like never actually explained in the games, which is like really weird. You know, they have this whole, oh, we have like these masks and they like wipe your memories and make you controllable, and then it's like never really touched on in any depth. It's just, it's wacky magic nonsense, which is like fine, I guess. It's not like a huge deal because it's not that important compared to some of the other stuff that's explained as being wacky magic nonsense. But it would have been nice if there had at least been like some, hey, how the hell that mask shit work? And we're gonna pause for another second to get some water and drink. Alright, so Act 3. Act 3 is a great start. Luna Sanctuary was really good. And actually kind of really reinvigorated my interest in the game. Because basically, like during Act 2, it being kind of bland. But really, I think it suffered a lot from like the gameplay, right? Like none of the boss fights were all that interesting and they were all like really easy. Like we won them all pretty much on our first try. I think the only one I didn't, like the only story fight I didn't win on my first try was when I didn't understand the AP condition for the Elliot's dad fight, and I was under the impression that it was like nobody could die ever, as opposed to it was just nobody can be dead at the end of the fight, which is like significantly easier. I forgot where I was going with this, but yeah, like, so I was actually kind of bored with Act 2. Like I remember I wasn't recording the game very much. Like I think going into Act 2 I had like a 30 video backlog. And by the time we got to Act 3, the backlog had dwindled to like 5 videos because I was just barely recording the game. I was just it's kind of the same thing that happened to me during CS2, where I hit that burnout phase towards the end. And so it became kind of a slog to go through up until you finally get to the Infernal Castle and everything. And then it became more interesting. And then the game's like, haha, you beat the game, JK, there's 80 more hours left. I'm exaggerating, of course, but yeah, like, basically I hit the burnout phase during Act 2 of the game, but then Act 3 kind of reinvigorated me, and I was pretty consistently trying to record, on average, a few videos a day. I wasn't really able to record every single day, of course, but I was recording much more often, partially just because of the Aurelia boss fight there. Like, the Vita boss fight before is pretty cool and fun as well, but the Aurelia boss fight really shined for me. It was like the first time in a while that like I kind of like felt like I had to really engage with the game on its gameplay aspects. Now, part of it was just me being kind of like dumb and not casting Magic Reflect ahead of time before she started doing her random 7th calibers that nuke the screen. And once I, just was like, okay, let's just make sure we have Magic Reflects up at all time, I think we won instantly. But prior to that, I was being kind of stupid and I'd get like destroyed. And it was like a little annoying, especially with like her chrono bursts and like that one time, like, there's that clip where she goes like 25 times in a row or something completely ridiculous like that. But it really like invigorated my interest in the game, which is another just element of like, I guess, to connect to the difficulty mod. I occasionally, mainly on CS1 and 2, I'll get comments about like, oh, why'd you play with the difficulty mod? It seems like you're not having any fun. And it's like, no. Actually, I probably wouldn't enjoy the games nearly as much if it wasn't for the gameplay actually being interesting. Because while I do enjoy the story and everything, having some like engaging gameplay to look forward to at the end of the long story sections is really needed. And it can be very... Because that's also part of the reason why I got burnt out on CS2 for a while, is that the combat just was like really easy, even with the mod. Or it wasn't that engaging. Because most of the fights were like I was having to actively handicap myself to make them interesting. But yeah, so the Aurelia boss fight deserves a lot of props for like really just like kind of giving me that second win to make it through the rest of the game. Then you have the Roselia boss afterwards, which is cool. I do like that perma burn mechanic. It would be nice to kind of see, like, because that is something that I think the series in general, as I kind of talked about earlier in terms of fight design, is there needs to be like more unique mechanics at play. And so anytime a boss does something kind of cool or unique, even if it's not executed that well, is cool. Like, you're gonna get props from me for that. Then you have the lore dump, which I really liked. Honestly, more lore dumps. Like, some people might find them a little boring, but like the more times you just spend 40 minutes trying to explain shit to me, the better. Like, I mean, I get the series is founded on being like mysterious and shit, but like sometimes I just want shit explained to me in a way that kind of makes sense. Because really that's kind of a big problem with CS4 in general, is that there's a lot of shit that just is not explained at all. And I don't know, it just should have been. And this is not necessarily like, I mean, you know, the surface level criticism they're just supposed to like, you know, show don't tell, but like, shut up. Sometimes you need to show and tell. Well, there was something else I wanted to mention here. Oh yeah, about the way in which the lore dump is presented is really cool. Like, I mean, I like the lore dump at the end of CS3 when you're in the church and everything, but this one was even more engaging because it's mainly in the form of like not really first person, I mean, somewhat first person perspectives, right? You're seeing the dialogue as opposed to it just being like explained to you. You're kind of getting to see the scenes yourselves, similar to the way like Sky 3 handled its side stories, and why honestly Sky 3 is still one of my favorites, is just because it handled its side stories and the characterization super well in a way that I think the rest of the series still should learn from. Then, so some of the things some quibbles about the lore dump. The soul reincarnation of Dreichels into Osborne. I mean, I talked about this in the tier list video, so I won't go into too much detail here. But basically, it feels like there's too much of an effort in the CS games in general, or I guess CS2 onward, of making an Ozzy into a superhero, and like this, you know, extraordinary being, as opposed to where he originally is just like a really fucking smart, crafty dude who's like got, you know, this kind of malicious charisma that enables him to do whatever he wants and outsmart people, which is like why he was originally a cool character. And then the CS games just keep adding like supernatural stuff to him, which I feel like undermines the idea that made him cool originally, which is that Osborn's just he's just like a fucking guy, but he's like so smart. And not to the level of being, you know, like a superhero, but he's just like quite crafty. And he is able to kind of engage and like obtain power in a world where there's like actual demigods running around, basically. Like, he's not perfect, he makes mistakes, as kind of initially evidenced by, you know, his assassination. When you hear about it in Azure, it's kind of like, oh, you know, Osborn's got a flaw, he got, you know, outsmarted or outmaneuvered. Which I think for the most part, I mean, there's kind of two different interpretations there. You could say that Osborn truly was taken by surprise by Crow's assassination attempt, but you could also be like, oh, it was part of his like larger plan. To a degree, I've kind of subscribed to the idea that like Osborn wasn't expecting to get shot there, but he then just was able to kind of cleverly use it for his own advantage there. Because honestly, his dialogue when he gets shot doesn't make sense if he knew it was going to happen. Because in CS1, he basically says, you know, I can't remember what he says, but he basically like he mentions that he knows Crow shot him, but it's almost like he he's like he knew Crow would do this, but he wasn't really expecting it at that point or something like that, maybe. So that could be the element of that he knew there was gonna be an assassination attempt, but he didn't necessarily know when it was gonna happen, right? Because I don't know, I just like the idea more that like Crow did pull one over on Osborn, but Osborn was just, you know, crafty enough to use it to his advantage in the end. I feel like that's much more interesting than him just like knowing it was going to happen ahead of time, but the game is a little ambiguous on that, I would say. But what were we saying? Oh yeah, the Dreichel stuff. Just in general, the whole, you know, Osborn being a super indestructible being that can't be killed. He's got Ishmaelga, the strongest divine knight. And he's the reincarnation of the legendary emperor. It's like, it's too fucking much. Like, I just feel like it goes too far away from what made Osborn cool originally, and he just kind of becomes almost a Mary Sue, or a Gary Stu, so to speak, because they just keep giving him like superpowers, and it's like, I don't know, I don't really like this. But yeah, my real issue with the Dreichel stuff though is that it doesn't do anything. Like, you could take away that aspect from the story and it changes nothing. And when you can do that, the question is, okay, do we need to add this then? Because really, it feels like the whole Osborn being Dreikel's was just an excuse to be like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if, like, you fought Dreikel's at the end of the game? Like, what if Dreikel's was the bad guy all along? And it's like, okay, how do we do that? What if we add reincarnation into our series, even though it's never been, like, mentioned or nothing, and we're not going to explain how it works? And he didn't, like, reincarnate immediately. He was like, it took a couple hundred years, and then he, like, reincarnated or something. Yeah, that'll work. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, like, you could maybe say it's supposed to explain why the Emperor let Osborn, like, run buck wild over the country, which maybe it explains it, but at the same time, it just makes the Emperor kind of like a big loser baby boy. Because it's like, who gives a shit what his soul is? Like, really, you're gonna let this dude, like, run rampant on the country and, like, do all this horrible shit? Because, oh, his soul is that of this dude who lived a long time ago. Like, bro, no, fuck that. His time has passed. He's not Zuzzy with the sauce anymore. He's a boomer. He doesn't know what's going on. He's out of touch. I don't know where I was going with this. It does remind me, there was some joke I thought of back in the Let's Play of Reen telling Osborn that he's not goated with the sauce anymore. And then Osborn trying to ask Ishmelga for a translation, to which Ishmelga would then try and explain to Osborn what a boomer is. And then that just strengthens Osborn's desire to destroy the world. That I never really got to work that joke into the Let's Play itself, but there's it told badly in the most unfunny form fashion. You know, just sneak that in an hour and 15 minutes into the 15-hour video. That's how you know it's like I need to take a break because I'm losing my mind a little bit after, you know, constant talking. But yeah, back to the reincarnation stuff. I just feel like it doesn't really add anything. It kind of makes the Emperor into a bit of a loser, even more so than he already is. Oh yeah, then you go into the first rivalry after that with the whole, well, initially then you fight on the Pantagruel and everything, which is, okay, this is, I don't know if I wrote this down, but I just remembered it and I want to talk about it real quick before we go any further. Another thing, like the whole, like, you know, in relation to Osborn's character, something that I found, I mean, we should probably save it for later, but I just want to go ahead and mention it while I'm thinking about it. In regard to, like, Osborn, like, he's actually, like, a good guy or whatever, if my man's so good, why the hell did he kill Oliver? Like, why does Osborn, because that's another element of, like, why, I mean, it's really more of a CS3 issue, where it felt like it wasn't thought out that well, in some regards, where, like, killing Oliver and the blowing up the Courageous, like, doesn't really do anything in terms of, like, the grand scheme of everything. And it's just like, he just kind of like murdered a bunch of people for no reason, which makes it even harder to buy the whole Osborn's actually a good guy that the game does at the end of the game. But we'll talk about that more later, but I just wanted to at least mention the whole, I mean, like, you could maybe argue that, like, oh, you don't want Oliver being around to be like, we're bad, which at the same time, I don't even think Oliver would say that because, I don't know, he's like kind of weird. He kind of seems like he would prescribe more to his dad's idea of, like, I'm not going to say anything directly. But, and plus, I mean, even if you're like, oh, you know, there's better ways to get rid of Oliver than blow up the ship and dozens of innocent people on it. Like, I don't know. It just kind of makes it even harder to buy the whole Osborn's actually a good guy. And you shouldn't be mad at him because he said, my beloved son at the end of the game. Huh? Yeah, you think about that? You think about that? No? Okay. Where are we? Going back to the Pantagruel. Or the Gargantua, not the Pantagruel. They're completely different. They're legally distinct entities. The Gargantua is a cool set piece. It doesn't really make any damn sense. The whole, like, we put a barrier up around it because we don't want the rivalries to happen yet. Even though Osborn directly challenges you on the Pantagruel to, like, hey, complete the rivalries in 6 days or else. And then I'm supposed to, like, believe that Black Alberic's like, oh, I thought you were, like, joking about that. Like, shouldn't that have been, like, a major red flag? Like, when Osborn's like, hey, let's just do the rivalries real quick. Or the fact that he didn't, like, you know, order Rutger and Arianrhod back, when in theory they should have... I mean, Rutger at least would have done whatever he said, right? Because it's the contract. Arianrhod, I can understand, like, she does what she wants. Because they're more just like, you know... She's not really under him in the same way that Rutger is, when he's under the Black Workshop. And Osborne, by extension. So I just feel like that was just a weird excuse to be like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if you... And plus, it's like, it felt like they had to, like, resolve the Sharon George stuff. And so it was like, hey, what if we just threw in, like, a Gargantua thing? I don't know. It's a cool section, though, and in the way, like, you get to see the Courageous actually do some fighting as, like, a prelude for it fighting the Glorious at the end of the game. So that's cool. I didn't really care that much about fighting Sharon and George or their redemptions at all. Because honestly, Sharon being aligned with Ouroboros again never really made much sense at all. Like, her coming back just because Irina isn't going to commit war crimes anymore is, like, a big eye roll moment. And it didn't really... Like, I don't really get why Sharon rejoined them in the first place. It's just kind of... I don't know. It's partially just the issue of, like, I just don't find Sharon and Irina's characters to be interesting in the slightest. And that relationship feels so, like bad. Of Irina, basically, Irina's husband fucking wigs out, almost kills Sharon, and then Irina makes her into a servant afterwards, like, out of guilt. It's like, it's kind of fucked up. But, then you have, like, the George stuff. I didn't really like to see George just be, like, forgiven, because, you know, we're all friends here. I think he at least shows more guilt than Crow ever does in the entirety of the series. So, it's that. But basically, it's just kind of like a big whatever to me, all the George stuff. It's like, he's not really a big character, so I don't care. It doesn't bother you as much as it does with Crow. But it's just like, that general trend of, like, everyone gets forgiven is kind of annoying, because basically when everyone gets redeemed, it lessens the impact, right? Like, when every single character gets forgiven for all the awful shit they do, it's kind of like, okay, but it kind of, I think, undermines some of those examples of good redemptions that the series is able to do at times. And then the actual second rivalry itself, kind of sucks that you don't fight all Zephyr at once, because there's no real reason for it, right? Xeno and Leo as solo boss fights are complete and total jokes, both like gameplay wise and like thematically speaking. There's no like way you can buy the idea that they would be like a real challenge for all of Class 7 together. And honestly, the same for Rutger, right? Because you initially fight Rutger in CS3 when he has 3 other people helping him out, and you still win. So the like, even if he's going all out now, it's kind of hard to buy the idea that like, oh, Rutger's that strong, right? That he can, you know, fight you all off by himself. Now maybe if you hadn't already fought him in CS3 with 3 other characters backing him up, so it really should have been you fight all of Zephyr at once during there. It's the same problem with the third rivalry a bit later on with Arianrhod, but there's no reason you shouldn't fight Arianrhod and the 2 Star Ritter at the same time. And even in general, even if you buy the whole, well, he wasn't trying thing, like, stop with the whole I'm not trying nonsense, please. It's so, like, played out at this point. So then you have the final scene between him and Fee, which is just great. Honestly, like, just no complaints there. And I think it really just showcases how, like, a true and believable death can have, like, an immense amount of narrative weight. Because Rutger is not that great of a character. I mean, he's like kind of cool, I suppose, but he doesn't have a lot of depth to him. But his death is actually one of the more moving scenes in the series, just because, I mean, he actually dies. Like, I mean, compare the Rutger scene to the Oliver quote-unquote death scene, for instance. And even though Rutger's a much more minor and less likable character, there's much more emotional weight there. Because it feels real, and it is real, right? You know, just the simplicity of the scene of, you know, Fee saying goodbye to, you know, her dad. It's really good. And Rutger kind of choosing to go out on his own terms because he shouldn't have been brought back to life in the first place is great. I have no complaints. Then you have Well, before you go to the third rivalry, you do have the free errand quest, which is kind of cool. There's not really too much to say about it in general, but it is just a good example of like the generally improved side quests CS4 has to offer. Like, I will say that about CS4, it has the best side quests of the series probably, with the free errand quest, the Eventide drinking quest, the Ghosts of Hamel, the SSS quest are all, you know, just really, really cool. Then when you go to Crossbell, it's cool to see. I mean, Crossbell, I'm just always happy to be there. It's my city, dude. But it was nice to also see some previous characters like returning, get integrated into the story there to some degree. It would have been nice though if you'd had like some actual free roam sections with the cast. Not just like in this section in particular, but it was a little bit of a bummer just in general that you never get like a section where Estelle and Joshua are on the ship with you. Same with like Lloyd and Ellie or, you know, the rest of the Crossbell crew. It would have been nice if there was at least like one like section where they were along with you. You know, be able to walk around and talk with Estelle and them, or see some interactions between Estelle and Joshua on the crew of the Courageous. Would have been really cool. And I do think that's kind of an example of like, I mean, I like the returning characters, but you have to kind of accept that for the most part it's like fan service, which is not bad. I like the fan service, but it would have been cooler if they'd had like a more major role. Then you have the McBurn-Victor fight, which is very cool. One of my favorites in the game, just in terms of like raw gameplay. And it's like thematically very cool, fighting McBurn and Victor. You know, they kind of had their initial like rivalry in CS2, and now here they are fighting against you. And then you have like the setup of, you know, superdy duperdy McBurn that you're going to fight later, because you haven't fought McBurn enough in the series. You gotta fight him 7 times. Come on, we've only fought him 7 times in the series. That's like way too few. I mean, the McBurn fights are honestly like always pretty good. I think McBurn, of the characters that you fight 1,000 times, he's the best, like most well done. Haha, get it, fire. He's the most like well done character in that regard, just because like for the most part, every time you fight him, he's like slightly different. He's like a little bit more amped up each time. But at the end of the day, though, the Victor McBurn fight is kind of just filler, but it's very cool filler. The stuff with the mask and everything is still kind of dumb, but it's whatever. I mean, it really is just like, we want to have a McBurn-Victor fight. That would be cool. How do we make this happen? I don't know. He's got a mask. But at the same time, the mask isn't what caused it. It's the Great Twilight in general, but it's also the mask. Because when the mask gets destroyed, his mind is fine. So I don't know. Really weird mixed messaging there. The third rivalry is, I didn't like it as much as the second. Mainly just because like the climax, like I feel like it should have impacted me, but it just didn't. Like the lead up fights are kind of lame, and Ines in the mod is a fucking war crime. Like not necessarily because it's hard, because it's not hard. It's just that it's like boring as hell if you don't have a specific setup, and you get like psyoped into like you don't realize that she's fucking like invincible until after you beat the robots, and then you're like, well, I can't lose, and I don't want to back out because I've already spent like 15 minutes fighting the robots. So it's like, maybe I can just, you know, maybe she'll eventually stop healing, and then you spend way too fucking long like sunk cost fallacied into the fight when you're like, I should just back out and equip break on everyone and then maybe win, but like, no, I don't want to redo the fight. Basically is kind of my issue with Ines there. Then the Arya Nerd fight's pretty cool. I like the magic phase that the mod added, just for the variety of it. It does kind of have like a slight issue where it's a bit of a gotcha, because who expects Arya Nerd to start like chain casting spells, considering she's never cast a spell in the series before? And it's like, if you don't already have like magic reflect or arch defense up before the fight, she just like one-shots you out of nowhere, which is kind of lame. But it is pretty cool for the most part, even with some of the jank in regard to her like chain casting the Titania's Blessing spell. So like in that way, if she does that, then that's actually a bit easier, and it's a slight reprieve. But it is cool. Anything to add more variety to the fights is nice, so I gotta give props to the mod there. terms of the story, I like Duvali's speech to Arianrhod pre-fight. I can't help but wish that Arianrhod had a better or more unique plan than, like, I'm just going to do what Osborne is already kind of doing, but I'm going to do it instead of him. Like, do you have the thing about her searching for Drakel's soul for 200 years, which doesn't really make any sense, right? Like, how? Why? How did you know that it was in... Dude? What? Because, I mean, like I said this at the time, it would make more sense if it was like, okay, he immediately reincarnated. Like, if you knew that there was reincarnation ahead of time, and you're like, I'm going to look for every person born, you know, around the time that Drakel's died. Because, I mean, that's semi-feasible. The idea that she, like, wandered the country for 200 years and, like, had her soldar active is a little... What? And it just kind of makes that whole plot point seem half-baked. I do like that Arianrhod is called out on being selfish for her plan, though, by Duvali, because I remember at the time being kind of, like, annoyed when she's talking about her plan. I'm like, this is the most, like, selfish shit ever. And then Duvali actually calls her out on it, so props for that. But, like, going back to, like, her plan in general, like, just something different. Like, one of the ideas, I think I'd kind of talk about this in the video itself, but the idea that basically she would have used her immortality to try and serve as a guardian that would prevent the curse from ever being unleashed fully, right? Like, if she, you know, kind of knew that there would be attempts to unleash the Great Twilight, so she founds the Stall Ritter as a way to preserve her legacy and keep, you know, a group trained to watch over the seal, so to speak, and then only once... Or, like, she infiltrates Ouroboros, like, knowing that they're going to try and unleash the Great Twilight eventually, and it's a way to kind of counter their move and get insight on their organization. Because that would kind of explain some of the dissonance of her being in Ouroboros and working along people like Wiseman and Campanella, who are, like, not good people. Because that is kind of... I mean, there's some definite, like, cognitive dissonance there, where it's like, Arianrhod's a good, great person. Her co-worker is Wiseman. And it's like they never, like, I mean, they never really, I mean, they do kind of vaguely address that, I think, actually, in Sky 3, when they're all talking about Wiseman's death. You know, I can't, it may actually be Arianrhod that says this, but I think they all kind of say that, like, they take some blame for, like, we should have taught him to be better, which is just kind of funny to me. I don't know. They, you know, they say, like, because I think it's, like, the Grandmaster blames herself for Wiseman's death, and then they all interject to be like, no, it's actually our fault for not teaching him to not be a mass murderer. And it's like, yeah, alright, why didn't you guys do that then? Fucking weirdos. But yeah, but basically the idea that she was only going to join in the Great Twilight and the rivalries once it became inevitable, like if she tried to help Class 7 at the Grawl, but failed, ultimately, like maybe even have her fight off against Dreikel's and he, or not Dreikel's, fight off against, oh god, now I've gotten psyoped into it. For all my complaints, it's gotten in my brain. Fight off against Osborne, and that would actually be a really cool way to, like, establish Osborne as, like, fucking hot shit. Is if you had, Arianrhod try and fight him, and the Ebon Knight just fucking mollywops her ass. Now that would be a freaking hype moment. And it would kind of buy that idea of, like, okay, you do need to do the rivalries to beat the Ebon Knight, because it's so much stronger for unexplained reasons. I think that would be kind of cool. If it had been, like, you know, she did try and work to, because I guess, like, the central problem with Osborne's, like, plan, right, is that, like, the curse is bad, yes, but it's not, like, a world-ending catastrophe. It's just kind of, like, it's a generally shitty thing, and Osborne's plan is to, like, come up with some crazy idea that's going to kill, like, a significant chunk of the population to solve it. When, I don't know, if you did, like, a straw poll of the population of Zemuria, you'd probably get, like, 95% of people would be like, yeah, the curse sucks, but, like, should we kill a few million people to prevent it? No, just, like, don't listen to the voice in your head, dummy. Because, I mean, there is kind of, like, a real-world parallel there, in a way. Like, if you think about climate change, where it's a world-ending event that'll eventually kill us all, but if you were to, you know, be like, hey, we can stop it, there's, like, an 80% chance we can stop it overnight, but, like, 90% of the population will die, fucking nobody's gonna vote for that shit. Okay, I mean, some people will, but like the vast majority of the population won't. And so the idea that Osborn just like takes it in his own hands, like bring the world to the edge of destruction, in like the selfish hope that he's gonna be able to like fix it all, is kind of like hard to buy. And it's the same with Arianred's plan, because she has the exact same plan as Osborn essentially. So yeah, that's kind of, I think that's maybe the best way to illustrate my issue with Osborn's plan, is that it's like incredibly selfish, and he's just like blowing up the world to stop something that's like bad, yes, but it's not a world-ending event, right? I mean, it's like burning the house down to stop a spider infestation. Like, yeah, the spiders suck, but you don't need to burn the whole damn house down. Like, yeah, I mean, you solved the problem, but like, at what cost, man? Then, you know, the post-fight sequence, mixed bag. Like many things. I wonder if I control F mixed bag on my notes. It's probably there like 30 times. Now, that's maybe just me being unoriginal in my notes, but it also describes a lot of how I feel about the game. I really like the emotion from Duvalie in that scene. In her speech to Arianrod. I liked it more than her pre-battle speech. And I do like the line from Arianrod about how over the course of the last 200 years she'd forgotten how precious life was. Which is, it's just a generally good line, and I do like that it connects back to that idea of like her plan is selfish, right? That she's not really weighing the value of all the lives that are lost in the pursuit of the thing that she thinks is good. Because if I'm a soldier who got drafted and then blown in the head on the first day of the Great War, I'd be pretty fucking mad. I'm like, man, I don't give a shit about no curse. I'm just not going to listen to the voice in my head. I'm going to be an informed citizen. So why the hell do I got to die because of some stupid curse? This is bullshit, man. I didn't ask for this. So, like, I do like that sense. I was pretty on bringing her back. Like, just because in general, I mean, it's not really a fake out death. So it's not that bad, but there was kind of it's an element of a fake out death, because it's kind of implied that like, oh, if you lose a rivalry as a immortal, you're toasted. Or really it felt like it was if you lose a rivalry period, you're toasted, but then they amended it to be like, it's only if you're already dead, then you die, which I mean, kind of makes sense, but I feel like that just wasn't really like established very well pre-Cedric fight. But basically all that to say, I was kind of on her being brought back in that sense. So I wasn't against Rufus killing her, but like the presentation of Rufus killing Arianrod is like comical. Like he just like sneaks up, teleports behind them, and stabs her in the back. I mean, it's literally the teleports behind you, nothing personnel kid meme. Like that's what he does in the story. He teleports behind you, stabs you in the back, and then fucking laughs and teleports away. It's just like, it's really hard to buy in the moment. And plus the idea that he's able to like sneak up on him in the first place, like, I can kind of buy like catching Arianrod and them off guard, but like Reen has these fucking sensor powers. Like the entire game they're talking about how Reen can sense shit from like a miles away, but he doesn't sense Rufus. Or then you have, you know, Roselia in the room as well. You have like 30 other people just like standing around, and like nobody senses or sees Rufus in there. Rufus can just teleport behind you. I don't know. It's just like, I really wish it had been presented differently. I kind of have like two ideas. One would be that like Arianrod like sacrifices herself. Like Rufus shows up and he's gonna like try and wipe out. Because another issue with it is that like he stabs Arianrod in the back and then he just lets Reen and Crow leave. Like there's no reason for Rufus to not just like wipe the floor with Reen and Crow while they're exhausted after fighting Arianrod. Because that's like an element that just makes it feel extremely arbitrary, because he's acting out of character there. Where it's like, okay, we want to give Arianrod's power to Rufus instead of Reen, but we don't really have like a good way to do it that makes sense. So Rufus just like runs away instead of killing Reen and Crow, which is like definitely what his character would do there. Because if he wants to win the final rivalry, there's no reason for him to not just take Reen and Crow's power for himself right there. And he would be basically ready to fulfill his goal, because all he'd have to do is like wipe out Cedric real quick. which should be like an extreme walk in the park. So like another, I guess like there's two kind of ideas I have for Arian Road like instead, because like basically it just feels like a kind of a shitty end for the character, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, right? I mean, you don't have to always tie a happy bow on stuff, especially when it comes to character deaths. Like, I mean, death fucking sucks. It can come anywhere. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. It does go against some of the themes of the series though, or at least the themes of the CS games, where, you know, they're all like positive and shit. Like they're not really depressing. Or like there's no real like there's not a lot of realism in that regard to the CS games. So Arian Road just kind of like, you know, this legend getting stabbed in the back and dying feels really bad in that sense. So maybe if it was like Arian Road sacrificed herself to like hold off Rufus while Rena and Crow and them make their escape, because Rufus is like, basically he states that he's gonna kill them and they know that they can't fight him back. Or if it's like when they leave, like, you know, Arian Road decides to leave with them and then there's like a massive ambush at the gate led by Rufus. And then Arian Road stays behind and Rufus kills her. In that sense, and then slurps up her soul like a milkshake. That would be pretty cool. Or like, I feel like that'd be better because at least it's Arian Road like going out on her own terms. Right? It's kind of the same way that like, because, you know, Rutger got to go out on his own terms by choosing to die. Or, you know, the way Loe has like one final moment of defiance against Wiseman before he dies. And Arian Road just doesn't get that. Like, despite being such this Omega tier hyped character, she just kind of gets one shot by a loser. And I don't know. I mean, it's not necessarily bad, but it does feel lame. Another aspect about Arian Road that I feel like, this is not necessarily exclusive to her, but she's the best example of this. It sucks that there's no real dialogue between the Awakeners and their knights, aside from like Reen and Valimar, and to a lesser extent, Crow and Ordine. Because Arian Road and Agrelion, or Agrion, something like that, I can't remember his name, the Argent Knight, like, they in theory should have like the strongest bond imaginable. Like, they've been together for 250 years. Agrelion is like the only person Arian Road has had with her that entire time that she's been immortal. Like, that's in theory been the only person that she could connect to. And they never talk. Like, if there had been like an example of them having like banter or like a strong bond between them, that would have been so cool. And I think it would really like make Arian Road's character better by like kind of demonstrating that idea that she's been alone for 250 years. That, like, the only thing she has, like, the only companionship she's had has been her Divine Knight. So that would have been, like, that's kind of, like, I think a missed opportunity there. And I feel like it's the same for the other Awakeners as well. I feel like Arian Road is definitely the best. Because, I mean, on one some of them, like, Cedric, okay, what's Vermilion Apocalypse gonna say? I'm fucking mad. That dang dragons fucking spit up on me and now I'm all angry. And then, I don't know, if I was the Auric Knight and I had to talk to Rufus, I wouldn't talk either, so that makes sense. It would have been cool if Zector had a personality as well, though. Like, some banter between Zector and Hector. Not Hector. Zector and, Rutger. I don't know why I was saying Hector. I guess I was thinking of the Vermilion, the Emperor guy. But yeah, definitely, like, in general, I would have liked to see more banter and, like, give the knights more of a personality, but it's most apparent with Arian Road, I think. So then we move on to Eventide. We're almost 2 hours in. We're not even at the end of the fucking, we're not even to the finale yet. I had expected to be at the finale by now. Fuck, man. Well, this is, like, the halfway point of my notes, so, got that going for us. I probably will pause for a second though before we continue on. So be right back. Alright, so we're back. We rested up a little bit for the second half of the video. Feels bad to say that we're on Eventide. Yeah, we're only halfway through the video, but I have a feeling that's the way things are about to go. Guess it just depends on how many weird off-topic rants I go on. We had quite a few in the first half. Maybe we'll have a bit less going forward. No promises, though, because they're kind of fun. Eventide. Alright, overall, a really nice section. And the second best of the festival type sections in the series, I still think you gotta tip the hat to Azure. It's still the best. It has the best like actual event scenes, I think. But Eventide, it's pretty close, just because it does have like a bit more grandiose, with it being the last one, or like the final capstone, like festival style event for the series, so to speak. It's right before in theory, the climax of the game, if you don't spend 15 videos talking to NPCs, but no one would ever do that. But it's just, overall, it's just like a fun time, getting to see all the different characters together, some of those interactions, right? Like, ones that kind of stick in my mind, like the teasing of Reen about his harem, and like, you know, Randy being like, oh, for once, Lloyd, you're not the most coolest person in the room. Like, that's pretty good. You know, the dynamic thing, like, because you don't see a lot of like talk between Lloyd, Reen, and like Joshua and like some of the boys. That's cool. And even just like the running around doing like all the NPC talking, there's some good stuff there, like Shira and Oliver getting like trashed. Before then, you have like the drinking contest side quest. That's a lot of fun. Probably one of my favorites in the game. I mean, it's not quite like as impactful as, say, like Free Aaron or Ghost of Hamel, or even the SSS side quest, which is more fun than like impactful, just because like the Diana stuff is like very whatever. But it's a nice callback. You know, I really love the drinking side quest in Sky 2. It was probably my favorite side quest in that game. They're kind of having a return of that. They do kind of cop out a little bit. It would have truly gone to the next level if we'd gotten to see like Drunk Aurelia. That would have been fantastic. But they rob us. Same with like Drunk Sharon would have been cool. Just completely smash Sharon. That would have been nice. Even smashed, what's her name? Garden Lady. Edel, that's it. That would have been cool. Overall quality of the events themselves, like the festival events, they're like pretty good. Like, they're better than CS3's. I'd say they're about similar to CS1's, maybe a little bit better on average. It's just I think the whole like the whole thing together feels better, since you're mainly just talking to important characters as opposed to like random NPCs during the festivals for CS1 and CS3, and also Azure, where you're mainly talking to NPCs as opposed to in CS4, where it's mostly just actually important characters. There's just a few random NPCs thrown in. In terms of the story, you have the Divine Blade sequence, which is extremely good. The S-Craft that you unlock there is probably the best in the series. Like, it's cool, and it has that extra like level of story impact, with it being something that you actually see Reen learn and unlock, and it feels like the culmination of everything he's been working towards throughout the CS games. Plus, then you also have the fan service of Sword Cassius and the Richard callback. That's cool. It does kind of suck that you don't really get to see, like, you know, Cassius using the sword. I get why that happens. It's just, you know, you don't really want to like fully give Cassius a bunch of animations on a series that's already kind of going like punching above its weight class in terms of scope. So just kind of having him use Reen's stuff. I mean, there's like the thematic or the explanation for it I can buy. It's like, it's okay. It's like Reen's fighting himself. It's fine. I mean, you know, it's definitely something to like mask kind of a technical aspect, but Cassius being involved in it, it's cool enough in and of itself. And it's another aspect of that I like. It's like you don't really ever see characters train in game. Basically everything just kind of is unlocked randomly depending on level. I mean, there was like a kind of an attempt to like have S-Crafts unlocked in relation to the story in CS1, and to a lesser extent CS3, but it really didn't work very well because it took too long, and the times in which you unlocked them were just felt like kind of arbitrary. You know, stuff like, it's like you're fighting the first boss, Reen can flame slash now. You know, it's not always something that you work towards, whereas here it feels kind of cool, right? That it's like Reen passes this test and gets a cool new ability out of it. And just in general, I love me a good training sequence. Big fan. So that was pretty cool. And, you know, Reem becoming a divine blade at the end of it all is nice. I do kind of agree a little bit with Reem that it feels like I mean, it's really not soon. Because, I mean, he, you know, probably canonically is, like, as you would think, be as strong as Arios, or at least close to his level when he became a Divine Blade, at least originally. So, I mean, it makes sense. But I guess it does just feel like a little, like... And I guess that is cool, though, to have, like, an actual playable character reach something that had been exclusively reserved to just cool NPCs. For once, the player character can maybe actually be cool. Blasphemy, I know. Then you have like the regular capstone bond events, which are pretty good. None of them, like, most of them don't really stick out that well. But they're solid all around. Then you get into the romantic final bond events. It is kind of a bit of a bummer that the dudes don't get like cool like capstone bond events, right? I mean, like, to a degree, I mean, I get it, you know, the female characters are going to be more popular. But even aside from that, like, there's maybe an element of, like, because if you do add dude final bond events, you're, like, more than, like, you're doubling the amount of, like, total final bond events you have to do. So that would be, you know, there is a lot there. But it would have been nice. It is kind of a bummer that you don't get that. Just because some of the, you know, some of the dude characters are, you know, cool. And kind of having a best pal type, like, even if you don't want to go, like, full romance stuff there, like, even just, like, a best pal, like, best friend, heir to them would be kind of cool. Right? I mean, Randy's final bond event in Azura is still my favorite in the entire, series. And, like, Wazi's also in Azure is really good as well. And some of the ones in CS, like Machias's is good in CS2. And there's others, probably. I remember liking Eusis's in CS1, I think. But yeah, but basically, you know, slight bummer that it's only the romanceable characters, but, you know, whatever, I get it. Those events are, stop me if you've heard this before, a bit of a mixed bag. Some of them are really good, like Toa and Fees are great, right? Like, Toa's in particular is by far the best, I think. And it just kind of, in general, goes back to that, my just beef with bond events that I won't get into too much, where it'd just be better to pick one character, any character, even if it was like, you know, someone I don't like, or not only don't like, but someone I don't care about, like, say, like Emma or something. It would be better if you just picked one and had, like, a canon choice and then built the story around it, and it would be more impactful. But having some of the bond events actually be kind of good, like Toa's, does kind of make me feel bad about, like, you could have just, like, picked a character and, like, actually had, like, real chemistry between them, and it would have just felt so much more impactful. But yeah, I mean, some are good, some are not good, and some are mid. But yeah, I don't know. In general, bond events, I'm not super hot on them as, like, a concept. I don't think they're bad per se. I just think they need to be refined. I mean, the main things I would change if, like, they were to ever come back. I think I've been told they're not in the next game, and I think they're like in Kuro but different or something. I don't know. Don't tell me, by the way. Anytime I speculate on the future, just don't let me stay in ignorance, by the way, just like as a rule. But yeah, it's kind of lost my train of thought there for a second. But, like, if bond events were to be refined, the main thing I would change is no more bond points. Don't restrict them at all. If you're going to have romantic ones, it should be a clear choice to make them romantic. You should have, like, platonic and romantic routes for characters that are going to have romantic routes. And that's the main thing, I think. Make them kind of, like, mandatory, honestly. Like maybe you can pick when to do them in the story, like during your rest sections, but, like, I feel like there's a lot of good scenes that are locked behind Bond events, and when you lock those scenes behind Bond events and make them optional, you just kind of like make your cast worse for no reason. And especially it's like it's a bit of an issue when you have such a large and unwieldy cast as CS does, where you already have a problem where some characters don't get the development they deserve or like they need. And so when you sanction that off even further into Bond events, you're just kind of shooting yourself in the foot. So overall, Bond events, they're not awful. They're not like, oh, these need to like be completely removed. You can refine them and make them better, but I do think the game would maybe be a bit better without them. Like going forward, like either significantly change them, like just don't bring them back in their current iteration, I think. At the very least not, like don't, if you're going to do like romance stuff in particular, don't tie them to Bond events anymore. Like if you're going to have romance, have it be a set character. Or if you're going to have multiple, like don't have quite as many. Have it just be like a couple, and then maybe you pick to make them romantic in like say like the first game, and then from there on they're romantic. Because that is another issue, right? With that I talked about in like so many of the confession Bond events in CS4, where they, you know, characters are like, "Oh, we fucking love you, Reen," and then Reen's like, "I legally can't say yes or no until 100 hours from now. Goodbye." Because it's like he can't, you know, Reen as a character doesn't get to have an opinion. So that would, because that's, I think, kind of like an issue with like CS3, right? When it like reversed all of the romantic Bond events, where there's no continuity there anymore. When it's like you could have characters be like, "Oh, we freaking love each other," and then they, you know, don't at the start of CS3, or they don't until like the end of CS4 again, just because that had to be ignored due to like save continuity stuff. So yeah, I think like choosable characters could work, but I do feel like if you're going to do like choosable romances, it should be romantic earlier and then integrated into the story better. And if that requires having fewer choices, then like so be it. Or, you know, best case scenario I think would be having no choices and having one specific romance that the story's written around. But all right, we talked about that enough throughout the Let's Play, but that's it for Bond events. We're done. Randy's still the king of Bond events. Toa can be like a second place because her Bond event is pretty good. Or her final Bond event. She's probably queen of the romantic ones. Alright, then you go into the Infinite Morning, which definitely, like, it makes no sense. Like, from a plot perspective, the idea that they run around all of Erebonia for 14 days in 4 hours to do all this, like, talking and exploring and quests and whatever. But it's definitely the best intermission section. I really love the long final send-off to all the characters and locations, and you have several good side quests to keep you going along. Like the SSS and the Lee Burrell side quests are great. Probably some of the best in the entire series. The Ghost of Hamel is probably the single best side quest out there. The SSS one is more fun than good. It is a lot of fun to kind of walk around some of Crossbow with the SSS and have stuff like Lloyd getting to flex his detective skills and whatnot. The actual, like, meat of the quest with going down into the Geofront to fight some random demon that's, like, trying to eat people's brains or whatever is kind of just because, like, there's no real resolution to the Ellie Diana stuff. It's just kind of like they talk briefly and then the quest ends. Like, there's no real, like, emotional weight to it of, like, Diana apologizing for basically prioritizing her own mental well-being over her child by abandoning her for such a lame reason as, like, the city makes me feel bad, so I'm just not going to be with my child anymore, which is just, like, really bad. Like, I mean, you're abandoning your child. Like, it's honestly, I think it's worse abandoning a child at, like, the age of 10 than it is to abandon them at the age of, like, 0. Because it's, like, I mean, I can't imagine how, like, fucked that would be, right? To, like, have your parents that you know and love, and then they just, like, leave you because they value their own, like, mental well-being over yours is, like, kind of bad. Because at least if, like, you didn't know them, like, you could never, you never knew them to love them in the first place. Like, kind of speaking slightly from personal experience, right? One of my parents wasn't really in my life until I was about 10 years old. And it never really affected me, right? Because it was like, well, I didn't, you know them to really care in the first place. But if, like, say, if my mom had, like, left when I was 10, the person I'd been with, like, my entire life, it's just been like, oh, I'm peacing out, see ya, I'll write a letter occasionally, that would have, like, fucked me up. Like emotionally. But, so yeah, like, them just kind of, like, Diana, like, they're not being any real, like, contrition or, like, conclusion to that feels bad. I don't know. It could have been a cool scene, but instead there's not even, like, a scene to be mad about, I guess. Then you have the Ghost of Hamel, which is great. It's a great conclusion to Ash's arc, and also some additional closure for Joshua, which is probably the reason why I think Joshua is the best returning character, because he's, like, the only one that kind of feels like he gets any real advancement in his, like, arc, or, like, it feels like he had a reason to be there in terms of, like, how he advances Ash's character arc. Ash and Joshua getting to, like, meet their parents again in some kind of twisted form. Ash finally coming to terms with his own identity, getting that closure, accepting who he is, being able to put Hamel behind him forever. Could have probably done without the Lowe lines, just because, I don't know, man, my man's dead. Let him be dead. Alright? It's fairly minor overall, but I would have probably preferred if it had just been like Joshua talks to the grave, instead of Lowe actually talks himself, right? I think there could have been, like, some emotional weight there to, like, Joshua kind of talking to Lowe's grave a little bit. And, also his sister's grave. Trying to think, anything else to mention? There's also some of the other side quests. There's the Harvest Festival quest, which is nice. It's a fun little bit with Oliver and Shara and whatnot. And then there's the Alan quest, which is a nice send-off to all the various NPC students and kind of brings the whole Thor's NPC student lines it brings a nice little bow on them, to having them all come together and bring Alan back to his senses. I didn't really care about Alan as a character, but the scene itself is nice. Then you have the final super duper side quest against the Earth Holy Beast. It's kind of cool, but I kind of hate what it does, or maybe hate's a strong word, but I don't really like the way it ends up being intertwined with the narrative. We'll talk about that later when we get to the true ending. I will admit, though, more Toval is cool. We love the Toval. We love Toby. He's my boy. So having him show up in, like, a, slightly more than a cameo role there to be a playable party member, pretty pog. Pretty pog. And even just, like, the minor interactions you get between Toval and Reen there, like, Toval teasing Reen over getting taller and stuff, like, that's great. It really advances that, like, big brother dynamic that CS2 established. And then we move on to the climax of the game. So you have the opening cutscene of Mil Mirage and Operation Jormungand, which is cool, definitely. It was a bit more than I expected. Like, I was kind of, I guess, like, mentally prepared for them to cop out a bit when it comes to the actual, war itself. So getting to see, like, some of it, like, play out on screen is cool, and it helps sell the scale, like, on a much better than, like, saying, like, CS2, where, like, the war just kind of keeps happening off screen. So that was nice. I do still kind of, I mentioned this earlier about the whole idea of Mil Mirage, like, I feel like on a functional level makes no sense. The idea that they think this plan would, like, really succeed. I get it's necessary because, of course, the nations aren't just going to sit by and be like, hey, we're going to let some bunch of teenagers say, like, they're going to be our only thing we do. So it's like, I get mustering the forces to try and have a defense ready, but it does kind of feel like, considering Reen and friends are invading the Imperial Fortress that very day, you could just try and like draw it out for a little bit. I mean, I know the game says that like, oh, it's going to be minor skirmishes, but that is, you know, kind of denied by the cutscene, which very clearly shows not minor skirmishes. I mean, like one of the giant airships gets taken down immediately. Like there's only like fucking 6 of them on the Calvard side. I can't remember. Do you see? I think you see a Calvard one and an Erebonian one go down, or maybe just an Erebonian. But basically, like the fact that they lose one of their big, like, you know, aircraft carrier-esque, you know, like on that like level in terms of like military importance, like on the very first like opening engagement, kind of makes it hard to buy the idea that it's just a skirmish when you see their, you know, main forces pretty much fighting head on. Because it really feels like they should just like evade for at least a couple days to see if Reen and them are going to be able to succeed at the Imperial Fortress and see if maybe they can halt the war before any major fighting really breaks out. Because there's really, and also there's like no reason for Mil Mirage to even meet them head on, right? They're the outnumbered force. Erebonia are the ones that have to be on the offensive and like, you know, take and hold territory. The idea that we're going to meet the larger, more powerful, technologically advanced army on its own terms is kind of bad. But it's cool, but I just think from like a logical level, a lot of it doesn't make any sense. The 5 pillars of the Salt Pale, the False Pales, whatever you want to call them, it's a cool sequence. You know, you do have to, I mean, I acknowledge that yes, they do only exist basically to give everyone else that exists in the game something to do. But it's cool. Getting to control, especially getting to control some of the characters that like you wouldn't expect to be able to control that had not previously been playable members. The only real complaint I have about the 5 pillar section, well, there's 2. That the bosses you fight are kind of uninteresting. It would be like, I get why this doesn't happen, but it would be cool if there had been like more returning characters that showed up. Like, oh man, what if you fucking like, what if like some of the Sky Enforcers showed up? What if it was like freaking Walter was there? Oh yeah, I hadn't heard about, you've been hearing about Walter. Oh, Walter's back. He's here for 2 seconds to be a boss fighter, just something like that. I don't know. It really probably would have made more sense for like, say, Claire and Lecter to be guarding the Salt Pale than it would be for them to be on the Imperial Fortress where they exist to just get their ass clapped. Granted, they'd get their ass clapped on the Salt Pales as well, but the boss fights there being just like random reskins, like the Sky 3 boss gauntlet at the end of its game, is like, I mean, it's a little lame, definitely. It would have been nice if they were like more interesting enemies, but at the same time, all the interesting enemies are saved for the Imperial Fortress, so I get it. I will also say, I mean, this is more of like a mod issue. It being 5 boss fights back to back was a bit much. It's, you know, it's like 90 minutes with the mod. Now, of course, it'd be, you know, like, I don't know, 10 normal maybe. I don't exactly know how fast fights are, like, for a casual, like, I mean, not casual playthrough, but you know what I mean, right? But I mean, I do kind of think like I'm kind of the opinion that instead of having them be like all back to back, you should be able to just kind of like do one swap, do one swap, do one swap if you wanted to. I think that would have better, like, I guess it wouldn't flow better, but I would prefer it just because I don't really like being locked into like combat for an extended period of time. And once again, kind of like how when I talked about the Black Workshop, like the idea that, yeah, you could win the fights in like a few minutes, like playing optimally on vanilla, isn't necessarily a defense, because people could be bad and be locked in there for a long time. So I don't know. I guess I feel like the benefit added of having all the boss fights back to back is not outweighed by like how it would be nice to just be able to save in between them. But then we get to the Imperial Fortress. You have the opening friendship speech, which is like, it's neat having everyone kind of pitch in. I like it. It's a bit much, I think, when it feels like they're like freaking popcorn reading, like they're in grade school, where it's like one person reads a sentence and then they tell someone else to read the next sentence. And I wouldn't have mind Reen giving the most friendship speech to end all friendship speeches before it, but it's not bad. I get what they're going for. first fight of the Imperial Fortress, Claire Lecter. I mean, I talked about this in the tier list video, so I'll try not to go, like, waste too much time on it. It's a pointless fight. It adds nothing. And it really just shows that Claire and Lecter's characters had no direction at this point. Like, I felt like once you get to, like, the climax of CS3, there was just, like, no idea what to do with them. Like, them being antagonists that you fight is kind of pointless and doesn't really have any real role in the grand scheme of the story. Like, you could remove Claire and Lecter from the story and nothing changes. Like, this whole idea that they're the Knights of Blood and Iron feels super pointless because they don't really do anything. Like, the only thing they're there for is that, oh, you know, you gotta fight them so you can unlock a door. Okay? Like really, we had to reduce Claire and Lecter's characters to being, like, just, like we had to kind of destroy whatever we had built up about them so that they could be, like, a filler mini-boss? Really? And honestly, I feel like it doesn't even make sense for them to be functioning as antagonists, right? It actually still makes more sense for them to be, like, good people, so to speak, that are trying to guide Reen indirectly to make it to the final rivalry, because, I mean, that is Osborne's plan. He wants to be fighting Reen at the end instead of anybody else because he knows Reen's gonna he's gonna sacrifice himself. Like, that's the end goal there. Is that so that if he does lose, it's not going to be like Rufus, who's going to be like, I'm fucking Rufus, right? Like, Rufus would not do the right thing. Cedric probably wouldn't do the right thing. Arianrod would, and the jury's out on Rutger. He'd probably do the right thing. So it's like, I mean, that's kind of like, I guess, the whole point, right, of, like, making Reen the sacrifice is that you're supposed to try and make it so that he's the one that gets there in the end. Just for the insurance. So it actually would make more sense for Claire and Lecter, like, their role in terms of aiding Osborne is they're guiding Reen and helping him out and trying to aid the Radiant Wings, but secretly they have an idea of what Osborne's trying to do. They're not so committed to it because they don't know. For all they know, Osborne has just lost his fucking mind. But they have that faith that maybe, you know, there's a method to the madness. We're not going to completely throw away our morals and support the slaughter of millions of individuals, but we will hold out hope that what we're doing is actually still serving his best interest, right? I just feel like, basically, to sum it all up, Claire and Lecter being evil, there was no reason for it. There just isn't. I feel like it doesn't advance the story. It makes their characters less interesting. Lecter in particular, because he's not shown to be, like, undyingly loyal to Osborne. So having him become undyingly loyal to Osborne based on, like, a whisper of an idea potentially is... I just can't really, like, vibe with it. And it just kind of feels like their characters got ruined for no reason. Then you move on to the fourth rivalry with Cedric and Shirley. It's probably the best fight of the climax in terms of, like, gameplay with the mod. It's probably it, then McBurn, I think. The final Osborne fight's pretty good, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. I think the scene before the fight is really, really good. It's kind of another example of how I wish most of the redemptions had been handled, where Cedric showing, like, true horror at his actions and, like, that complete and total, like, just, like, emotional breakdown. I mean, it makes it's hard. I mean, you know, for all the... And it does help that there's, like, I mean, I don't really like the mind control stuff, but there's the mind control at least to be like, oh, well, you know, it's not really all his fault. Which is a little lame, because I think mind control is just, like, a cheap storytelling trick, as I talked about in the Let's Play itself, but... At the same time, as much as I hate mind control, I do think it's better than these characters just completely lacking any moral fiber, but still getting treated like a bunch of pals. Like, I would rather it be, oh, they were bad because... Mostly because of mind control, partially because of their own selfishness, than it being like, oh, they were bad because they're, like, a selfish person who doesn't have any regard for human life. But, you know, but we were friends once, so we'll just pal around with them, even if they don't show any remorse. So that's kind of annoying. I'm not even just talking about Crow there. In case you think I'm just talking about Crow, I'm not just talking about Crow. There's you know, George to a degree. He shows some remorse. There's Scarlet. Reen still like treats Scarlet nice, despite her being just as bad as Crow. Granted, it's actually, you know, I think I mentioned this in the tier list that Reen has some bullshit about how, oh, what you did, Scarlet, can never be excused, and then here they go excusing everything she did again, by letting her like go free and join the church. But yeah, I liked the Cedric scene a lot. I do like that it came before the boss fight, so the boss fight itself kind of felt like I don't know, it felt more like, I guess there's like an air of this is Cedric like trying to like prove himself a little bit. Like it's less hostile, I guess. And it feels a bit less than like, oh, you fight them and then now they're like all good, whereas it's kind of, I can't really explain my thought process here at all, but basically I like the idea that Cedric kind of has his contrition before the fight, because I guess it just means you enter into a different mental space, right, where you're not like completely like hating his character going into the fight, and then you kind of have like, you know, follow up on it afterwards where he's still kind of coming to terms with what he did after you win the rivalry and everything. I like that. I hate the line about Shirley saying that she never tried the entire game. Shut up. You lost. You're a loser. Don't talk to me. Then you have the Campy and Mariabelle fight, which is the second most fillery of fights after Claire and Lecter, where really the fight kind of doesn't serve any real purpose. It's kind of, I mean, there's like some small lore tidbits dropped, but like the idea that Campy and Mariabelle are at the Imperial Fortress in the first place is kind of like, I don't know, there's not really a reason for it. I mean, it's like in theory they're there to observe, but they also like teleport away before anything goes down. I don't know. I mean, I guess they're watching off screen, but they didn't really need to fight you, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say. At that point in the story, there's not really a reason for it other than just say it'd be cool, and we need a fight before you fight Rufus. We'll talk about some of the lore revelations a bit later, you know, the stuff about... Actually, I can't really remember what is part of McBurn's and what is part of Mariabelle's, and... Because McBurn is the revelation that you can't leave Zemuria, I think. And then there's the... Mariabelle and Campy is the idea of, you know, the mention of multiple worlds and, you know, shackles of the world and the vague goals of Ouroboros and stuff like that. And we'll talk about that later when we get to speculation, but... Then you have Rufus Franz. It's like a really weird fight. It really just feels like they had no fucking clue what they wanted to do with Albrecht at that point in the story. It was like, I don't know, man. He's with Rufus. He's also like simping all over the Argent Knight for some reason, despite being loyal to Ishmelga. I don't know, it's kind of like weird. And then Rufus is like, yo, I'm going to betray your master and kill him so I can become the super great one. And then Albrecht still helps him out during combat. Which, I mean, I kind of get it to some degree. Because I guess to a way, like, you know, maybe Albrecht is so, like, faithful in Ishmelga that, like, he doesn't care who's going to win. Like, he doesn't even fathom the idea that Ishmelga could lose the great rivalry. But it is kind of weird to be Rufus be like, yeah, I'm going to, you know... I'm going to kill Ishmelga and become the great one. And Albrecht's like, yeah, all right, I'll help you out in the fight. You know? The fight itself is probably the most, like, boring. So it's least interesting to the Final Dungeon fights, like, from a gameplay perspective. You know, Albrecht's S-Craft being single target means it's like, do you even exist? They don't really do anything. Rufus has his acceleration ability, but he's only accelerated himself and Albrecht, and Albrecht doesn't do anything, and Rufus doesn't do that much, so it's kind of like not a super interesting fight compared to, say, like, you know, the Cedric Shirley fight, which was like really like kind of stressful just because of like all the triple, like double, triple S-craft potentials that could pop out, and like the way they could like both buff themselves, and if you weren't in Luminous form or weren't in Demon Unchained, it would be hard to double cancel their buffs and stuff like that. So that was like a much more fun fight. Rufus as a villain, I think at best he is just okay. He kind of like doesn't do anything that unique. Like, we've already had plain evil villains in the series before, right? With Wiseman and Yakum and Mariabel. He's just not, like, he's not as intimidating or like cool as Wiseman. He doesn't have that like crazy psychotic energy of Yakum. I think I like him better than Mariabel, at least. Like, he's slightly less annoying. Mainly just because Mariabel, I feel like, still has, like, no purpose. And I'm still mad at her for, like, sidelining Grimwood at the end of Azure, because, I mean, Grimwood's still, I think, by far the best villain in the series. Like, definitely. I feel like he just kind of does what Osborn is trying to do from, like, a thematic level of, like, the greater good much better. Which we'll maybe talk about a bit later, but yeah, I think like him more than Mariabel at least. Even though I think technically he was lower on my tier list, but that was because he got placed in the filler space to protect everyone's souls level, which is lower than You Technically Exist, but not necessarily worse than You Technically Exist. So I guess I'll give Rufus that. But he's just, like, not that great of a villain. Oh yeah, also, like, some of the lore stuff that's dropped, the explanation about why certain knights are stronger actually, like, makes the idea that the Ebon Knight is so strong even more nonsensical. Because, alright, okay, so the Argent and Auric Knights participated in previous rivalries, and they slurped up soul juice and got super strong over time, so they're more powerful than Valimar. And Ordine and Zector? Alright, okay, that's cool. I buy that. Why Ishmelga strong? Why? Explain. If he participated in no rivalry, shouldn't he be like... Even if we accept that, like, Ishmelga was like... You know, like, the power was unevenly split originally, which I can kind of buy. Why is Ishmelga stronger than all of the Divine Knights combined? It's just dumb. And they never explain it. They never explain it. Which we'll talk about more about Ishmelga's character in a little bit. Then you have the McBurn fight. McBurn's cool. It's cool. I like that he's got like a cool new Pog form on display. Now, I do kind of stand by that you fight McBurn too much in the series. I mean, the final McBurn fight is the 7th McBurn fight. To a degree, I feel like... And that's kind of like an issue I have with the CS games in general, where you do fight some characters way too much. And I think they could have maybe introduced like a couple, either like bring back a couple more returning characters to act as villains in like occasional boss fights, or add a few new characters. Just because, like, I mean, you do fight some characters a lot in the game. Like, you know, McBurn 7 times. And, like, McBurn is the best example, where at least he's, like, slightly different for the most part every time. Like, maybe not necessarily gameplay-wise, but at least, like, thematically, right? It feels like he's always, like, he's, like, trying slightly harder each time. So it doesn't feel as bad, but at the same time, when you fought him 7 times, it's hard to get hype for it. He drops some cool lore that we'll talk about when we get to speculations on the future. I'm not going to go into it too much here. But overall, it's a cool sequence. I mean, I kind of still question his like whole logic in regard to I'm going to do the Great Twilight so I can destroy the world, because then the world's already being destroyed, so if I destroy the world by becoming my demon form, who cares? I don't think it's the best logic still, but it's like kind of whatever. I think it could have been presented or phrased differently. I don't know. I do like how, you know, he's like a lot more chill after you actually do the boss fight, and he gets some of his memories back. I guess it's not really explicitly stated that he gets all of them back. I don't know. It kind of seems to be like a bit of a mixed bag. Because they do imply in like the super secret ending that he's still like searching for answer, so to speak. So it seems like maybe he doesn't know everything, but he just knows most stuff or something like that. Then you have the Osborn fight, the big final climax. So some things right off the bat that tilted me. He opens it up by saying that like he may have gone a little overboard with everything. Like he refers to like all the people that have fucking died in the pursuit of his war and everything as going a little overboard, which kind of makes you want to scream. Same with when Crow talks about how he went a bit too far. I mean, the quote is he went a bit too far. Kind of also makes you want to scream. Like just sheer downplaying of what they did wrong. I mean, like, I went a little far when I murdered all those people. Just ridiculous. There's the stuff about like the sword of the end, which is like dumb. It's like, I mean, apparently there's like some explanation outside of the game about how the sword had to have a soul so it could do something. Like, I don't know. I feel like it couldn't have just been like a cool sword. Why did it have to be like another sword of the end that looked the same as the sword of the Zero sword or whatever? I don't know. That didn't really make any damn sense, even with the explanation that someone provided from like outside material. I just didn't buy it. It seemed kind of like random. Also, there's another aspect of, like, as I was thinking about during this section, that, like, the idea that Ozzy got Reen involved in all this is kind of fucked up. Like, it really felt like Osborn should have tried harder to not get Reen involved in the rivalries. That would have been kind of interesting. Like, if we're going to try and go for this whole, like, Osborn actually cared about Reen and he's, like, a noble person at the end of the day, which is what the game definitely tries to push. Because Osborn's idea for how to resolve the curse always involved the winner of the rivalry being killed, right? Now, technically, it is kind of eventually like established with Cedric that like you can lose a rivalry and not die as long as you don't die in the process. So the idea that Osborn tries to kind of nudge and push Reen into being the one he faces in the final rivalry is kind of fucked up, because he is basically using Reen as like a game piece to ensure that, you know, he's sacrificing his own son, like of his own volition, which kind of goes against the whole, even him rescuing him, like by giving him his heart and submitting to Ishmelga in the first place. Is like, why even save him if you're also just gonna kind of then later on use him as a pawn to ensure that Ishmelga gets killed? It's like, it's almost like, why even save him in the first place if you're just gonna doom him to die later? So because of that, I think it would have been better if there had maybe been like some efforts in like CS1 maybe. Like, I don't really know how to frame it really, but like something about like Osborn actually tries to prevent Reen from becoming an Awakener. Like, I don't know, like maybe he like visits the school and it like bans them from going into the old schoolhouse or something. Something like that would be kind of interesting if it was like there were some seeds of the idea that Osborn had actually been trying to prevent Reen from becoming an Awakener because he knew what could happen. Or if that was like why he was captured, right? If they had like established that capturing Reen was an attempt to try and break the contract with him and Valimar, either via like some magic Black Workshop nonsense, or if it was just by, you know, straight up killing quote unquote Valimar and absorbing his energy, like without actually killing Reen, so that he would get to like live on or whatever. Because really, they never explain why he captures Reen in the first place. Because it's not that he really wants to keep Reen, because they just let him leave. And if they wanted to do anything, they could have, because he was there for a month. So it would have actually been kind of cool if there had been like if they'd established that like they were trying to come up with a way to break the contract between Reen and Valimar, so that Reen wouldn't have to participate in the rivalries as a way to save him. Like, something like that would have actually helped me buy this whole, like, Osborn's, like, a noble dude who actually cared about Reen in the end. Because really, Osborn never treats Reen as anything other than just, like, a pawn, right? I mean, he calls him his dear son at the end, but that doesn't mean anything. You know, your actions speak much louder than your fucking words. And he never does anything. Because it's not even like he had to pretend that he didn't love Reen still, because it's not like, I mean, Ishmelga knows that. Because that's the whole reason that Osborn, in theory, got the contract in the first place. And it's not like Ishmelga wouldn't know that Osborn still is retaining his personality, because he sometimes acts slightly against his interests, right? By, like, you know, starting the rivalry sooner than it should have been, stuff like that. It's like, I don't know, I just feel like the whole Osborn-Reen stuff could have been done so much better. And just like some minor changes like that, I think would like really help me buy that more than it's just like Osborn's like a piece of shit for like the entire series, but then he's like nice right before he dies, and it's like, okay, well, I guess it's all excused. So then you have like the first ending, which is just okay. It really still feels to me like the game was trying to have its cake and eat it too by having this like potential sad ending, but its impact is like lessened by, you know, of course you know it's not real because, you know, you've played the rest of the series at this point, but you've played all the games and you know that they're not going to kill off Reen. So it just kind of comes across as like super anticlimactic to have like this ending that you kind of know isn't really the ending. But it like during that credit sequence, you're just like, okay, like this feels really lame. And then the way the true ending is handled is kind of bad, I think. Because it's like, oh, you're fighting the final boss, you're getting ready for the big climax, and if you didn't do the super secret side quest, it's like, hey, go do a random boss fight real quick that completely breaks up the flow of the climax, and then fight Osborn again. Yeah, do that. That's just like not good. I just don't think it. I don't know. I don't like it. I feel like the Earth, like the Earth stuff should have just been integrated into the main story as like, oh, that's a thing you have to do before you can do the actual climax. I just don't feel like there's much need there. I mean, people have said something about like, oh, it's important that there's a bad end first, which, I mean, I guess if they're going to do some like Azure type thing where, in this timeline, Reen died, and then we had to like roll back the clock to make it so Reen didn't die, so stuff could happen. Like, I mean, I don't know. You didn't have to do that on screen, right? I guess. I just feel like it just completely breaks up the flow of the climax. And like, I would have been pissed if I had, because at least if you do the Earth Dragon fight first, you just get to reload and don't have to do the whole boss fight again. But if I had been thinking I was about to beat the game, and then it's like, hey, go fight this random monster, and then also redo the final boss real quick before you can actually see the ending of the game, that would have annoyed the hell out of me. And the fact that, I mean, you know, just going by like achievement percentage completions, like almost 3% of people like don't even see the true ending of like people who have beaten the game. Like it's like, I think it's like 2.7% on Steam just get the regular ending and not the true ending because they do it dumbly, I guess. I don't know. I just like the idea that you're like potentially lying, even though it's a very small percentage, but still the fact that like some people made it to the end of the game and then just maybe didn't know there was another ending that actually like wraps things up, it's just like, that's not good. But then, you know, going to the actual true ending itself, it's solid. It's more like what I expected. You know, you got to fight a big, super big monster with everyone, and it's cool. The presentation of it, like, it's like, it's not the great one. It's Ishmelga Loga or whatever. Loa, I can't remember what it's called. It's kind of weird. It's like, shouldn't it just be like the great one? Why is it Ishmelga and not the great one? Because shouldn't it be the great one at this point? I don't know. We'll talk about that more in a little bit when we get to a discussion of Ishmelga's character and how it doesn't need to be in the game. But yeah, the actual final boss fight itself, being able to assemble the three parties from basically every playable character is really cool. I do kind of wish, like, in terms of like the fight design, it would have been nice if there was actually a reason to swap between the parties, which as far as I could tell, there was no reason whatsoever. It was just you do this one, you do the two side fights, then you return to the main fight. Because initially I was under the impression that like swapping parties actually just swapped out the party on the main deck, and it would be like, oh, you know, maybe he's buffed with his arts are buffed right now for, you know, 20 turns, so now you want to switch to your physical party, and then like his defense is buffed, and then you want to switch to your magic party, and blah blah blah, as opposed to it being like 3 separate boss fights. You just have to do 2 of them first before you can do the main boss fight. So I think that would have been more interesting in terms of like design wise, but the fight itself was pretty cool. Some of the issues with the true ending, though, you know, basically it's not that different, right? I mean, Reen shows no growth or development in it. He's still going to sacrifice himself. He hasn't learned anything, even in the true ending. The Earth Prison is the most magical of magic MacGuffins, since it just pops up with no prior mention or allusions to its existence, and it just like saves the day. And it goes against this whole idea that you're told constantly that like, oh, you can't just seal away the curse, you have to like actually address it. It's like a real problem and you can't just seal it away, you gotta kill Ishmelga. And then the answer is to seal Ishmelga away, but like for really reals this time. And it just begs the question of like, okay, if you had this Earth Prison thing, why didn't you just use it back to seal the entire curse back in the day, or anything like that? Or even just if it's like, you know, kind of another story issue is that if the Holy Beast of Earth was able to seal half of the curse within itself, couldn't, you know, Roselia just seal the other half and then the curse be gone? I don't know. It's just kind of another example of how I feel like the curse was just not that well thought out. And like the key difference between the 2 endings, like, doesn't make any sense. Because it's not Reen coming to a conclusion about like how we need to find a better way or anything like that, or like knowing about the Earth Prison and how to use it. It's just for some reason Franz isn't corrupted in the true ending and is able to explain shit. It just feels very arbitrary. Final scene between Reen and Ozzy just doesn't have any weight to me, because I don't buy this idea that Osborn's like a noble dad or anything like that. You know, I still kind of maintain that he could have slipped info to Reen, considering he was apparently able to tell the Ironblood something during the Grawl, right? I mean, as they say, they were granted a small fragment of the truth. You know, Franz could sneak stuff past Ishii despite being fully mind controlled. Like, if anything, you feel like it'd be easier for Osborn to, you know, get some sort of info out. If Franz was completely mind controlled and he was still able to, you know, work on Milliam's spare body. I find that a little hard to believe. And then there's also the element of like, if the Ironbloods were told Osborn's plan in some form or fashion, as is stated in CS3, I mean, Milliam was there. Shouldn't Milliam have been able to be like, hey, yo, this is what Osborn's planning? I don't know. Another thing, you know, then you have the resurrection of Crow and Milliam. I think it's still pretty lame. I think it's kind of like, compare it to, because I was kind of thinking, it's like Azur's ending, where when Lloyd essentially is presented with the same decision in regard to Guy, where he's given the opportunity to bring Guy back if he wants, and he ultimately chooses not to, because it would erase the meaning of what led to his death in the first place and everything that's come since then. And essentially it's got, you know, the acceptance that some powers are just too strong to be used, and that, you know, the tragedies of life are what give it meaning. Like, I feel like if Lloyd had brought back Guy there at the end of Azur, it would have been really bad. And so they kind of just do that in CS4 by bringing back Crow and Milliam. Now, there is a bit of a difference there. It's not a one-to-one comparison, because there is a legitimate downside to bringing back Guy in Azur, right? It would basically cause him to go into a different timeline entirely, where everything that had happened previously never happened. Whereas there's no downside to bringing back Crow and Milliam. But yeah, I just feel like thematically, I mean, I just don't like bringing Crow back. I just feel like it completely robs all the meaning of like both of their sacrifices in CS2 and 3. And I think it just weakens the storytelling a lot. because I think that could have been a really like great like capstone emotional scene of like Crow and Milliam going away. Much like, I mean, the Guy Lloyd scene in Azure is very moving. Like when I rewatched it, kind of when I was thinking about when I was writing these notes, like it kind of got me, like rewatching it. I mean, it kind of got me a little bit at the time too, but I'm always a bit more like emotionally rigid when I'm recording than I am like just, you know, doing it on my own to some degree. Sometimes I think I can get a little, it depends on like if I have to do voice acting. If I'm reading text, it's easier to get emotional than it is to just like have it be voice acted. But if it's voice acted text and I'm recording, depending on like my frame of mind, it can be a bit harder for me to get emotional. But yeah, like that scene kind of got me a little bit in Azure. And whereas Crow and Milliam being brought back by the magical MacGuffin just feels cheap, I suppose. The final wrap-up VO with Reen is cool. I liked that. It felt kind of conclusive. The various art pieces at the wedding for the credits are just fantastic. I love that. Then you have the super secret Grandmaster scene. We'll talk about that in a little bit. First things first, though, I want to talk about Ishmelga for a little bit. Basically, my thesis statement on Ishmelga is that it is an entity serves no purpose to the story. There is no reason for Ishmelga to be a separate thing from the Great One. And honestly, it just kind of felt like the game wasn't really clear what it wanted to do with the Great One and Ishmelga. Like, there's so much mixed messaging, where like originally you're told the curse comes from the Great One, but then it's actually, no, the curse is something Ishmelga is doing on its own, independently of the Great One. Okay, but how is Ishmelga able to use the curse anyway? Why is the curse evil when Ishmelga uses it? Ishmelga wakes up randomly and became evil on its own, but none of the other Divine Knights do that. Why? How? Explain. Ishmelga is so much more powerful than all the other Divine Knights combined. Why? How? Explain. The Great One, despite all the talk, doesn't even really exist as far as the game is concerned. When all the knights are reformed, and in theory it should be creating the Great One, no, it's still just Ishmelga. You know, the final boss is called Ishmelga and not the Great One. You know, where the Great One be? Where it be? I think if you instead actually make the Great One itself the focus of the story, it comes across much better. Because basically, instead of the story being Ishmelga is a Divine Knight that became evil randomly, it's the Great One was sealed away in the 7 shards, but it still retains some sort of sense of consciousness and it desires to reform itself. Over 1,000 years, because it's a entity created on conflict, it feeds off the innate violence that humanity is prone to. Every war that humanity creates makes the Great One a little bit stronger. It concentrates its energies in Ishmelga, because maybe it just happened to be the most powerful, the one that had the greatest amount of essence, because the split was uneven. So over the 1,200 years since the Great One's sealing, it gets a little bit stronger with each and every single war, until eventually Ishmelga is strong enough that it has enough power that it's stronger than all the other Divine Knights combined, and then it is able to initiate the Great Rivalry, so it's guaranteed to win and would be able to reform itself. And it's like, you can't really be mad at the Great One because it's a force of nature. It doesn't have any real consciousness. It's drawn to conflict because it was created via conflict. The curse itself is not evil, or the curse itself wouldn't really exist. It would be that the curse is more the idea that it feeds off of negative energy that humans provide on their own with no external influence. And so it's basically the idea that the Great One is something, or like, the creation of Ishmelga is something that humanity does, but it would actually have a bit more weight to it if it was like, well, if humanity had just gotten along, the sealing would have worked. But instead, every single time a war broke out, every single time, somebody died and felt anguish, the power of Ishmelga grew a little bit. I think that'd be better than it's like Ishmelga became evil and then was able to exploit the curse to make more bad stuff happen, because the curse is just innately evil. Like, Ishmelga essentially would still exist. He can still be, you know, the conduit, like Dreikel, not Dreichel's, but like it could still be, you know, Osborn and Dreikel, Osborn slash Dreikel's could still be involved, right? It could be that the Great One scouts out Osborn because maybe you could even technically still have the soul thing if you really wanted it, or you could get rid of that entirely and it'd just be that Osborn is scouted out because of his potential intellect and influence in politics, that he could initiate the criteria to fully unleash, like to unseal all the Divine Knights with the Great Twilight and then set the stage for the big final rivalry. And then, like, I just feel like the idea of making Ishmelga the key antagonist is just a lot worse. I don't know. It requires so much extra explanations than it just being the Great One trying to reform itself. And I feel like it's a lot more... like, there's more interesting to it there. If you think of the Great One as just like this force of nature trying to remake itself, it didn't ask to be created, and it didn't ask to be split up. It was just seen as a threat, and humanity snuffed it out before it could do anything. So that there's kind of like an interesting element there that I feel like you just don't have when it's like Ishmelga is just like an innately evil being. I'm trying to think. Anything else to mention? But yeah, that's definitely that's most of how I feel about Ishii. I feel like Ishii is just like could have been done much better, or really like shouldn't have existed as a character, and instead it should have been more focused on just the Great One itself as a, you know, force of nature slash, you know, entity that exists above human reasoning. So we're going to kind of talk about some overall themes and messaging of the games, and like kind of a bit of overall thoughts on the series and CS4 as a whole. Let's drink some sauce first though. There's a chainsaw outside my window. I don't know if that's showing up on the mic, but if it is, I apologize. Alright, so I think one of the fundamental problems with the CS games in general is that when it comes to its themes and messaging, I feel like the CS games don't have much unique to say. They have some shared themes from the previous games and just JRPGs and anime in general, but I feel like the CS games in general, they struggle to explore themes and messages that are completely unique to themselves. I mean, you have your general themes like, you know, friendship and persistence in the face of adversity that you see in past games, and they're common just in, you know, the medium in general. But like, I struggle to really think of like what are the unique themes and messages of the CS games. You know, you have something like Reen's self-sacrifice arc is like a big aspect of the CS games, which doesn't even really resolve within them, and it's not even unique, right? Like, Osborn's speech to Reen at the end of CS4 almost directly mirrors Loe's speech to Joshua about self-sacrifice, and how, you know, you shouldn't die to protect the things you love, you should live to protect them instead. Sky and Crossbell, I feel, have their own unique messages and themes that they tried to address and explore, at least unique within the terms of the series themselves. They're not, you know, I'm not going to say they're like, oh, they're the only ones to ever talk about these, you know, very kind of basic concepts, but, you know, Sky had themes like, you know, not letting past trauma define your future, the nature of humanity, how our imperfections and flaws are what give life meaning, how a cold logic isn't really a replacement for human emotion, and that capacity for emotion rather than the capacity for higher level thought is what makes humans special. Crossbell had its themes of power structures and how much power can be given to an entity, right? When it comes to like Kia's ability to literally rewrite reality. You know, Grimwood has these grand aspirations of only letting the most intelligent and worthy people utilize this power so that it wouldn't be misused, but it kind of explores that idea of like, should anybody have this one, but they have this much power, right? I mean, Lloyd is given the strength or the ability to bring back Guy, a universally good thing. It would improve his life. It would bring closure and joy to Tio, Aria, Cecile, himself. But he ultimately rejects that because that's just not something he should have. It's not something he should be able to do. And that's interesting. You know, you shouldn't change the past. And it's futile to try, right? That, you know, he accepts that even his existence is kind of a mistake, right? That Kia shouldn't have gone back and brought them back. And he rejects that use. And that's interesting. And I feel like the CS games, like, they don't really have a core theme or message that I could think of. And what is there isn't explored that well or isn't unique to them. Like, honestly, I feel like the fact that I'm kind of struggled to even identify like a central theme of the series in general, that's not, you know, friendship or something like that, is, I mean, that's kind of a knock, right? Like, even within CS4, like, it's hard to think of anything. Like, one thing I came up with is that identity is kind of prevalent, right? You have, you know, Reen's search for himself in terms of, like, you know, his father and where he came from in CS1 and 2. You have the same thing with Ash. Muse to an extent with, like, her two different sides. There's a lot of mask motifs, right, in terms of the mask, like, overriding your personality and hiding your personality. Stuff with C, with this, like, you know, doppelganger, slight alternate persona. So I feel like identity is, like, something that they're kind of going for, but I feel like it's not really resolved that well, or it's not really core to the story. It's not explored that well. And I mean, it's possible, maybe it's a short sight of my analysis, but I kind of struggle to think of, like, what are the unique things that CS4 is trying to say that kind of give the story meaning. I feel like in a lot of ways, the CS games are more concerned with style over substance, which isn't bad, right? I mean, like, a lot of cool stuff happens, and that's cool. It's enjoyable. The games are very enjoyable, but not having some underlying meaning or message or theme behind why the things happened I think is why maybe I feel a bit more critical about the CS games in general. Because they don't have as much interesting or unique to say within the context of their own series. And so I think I come across harsher on the story and the logical inconsistencies than I maybe did on some of the stuff that happened in the previous entries. Because I felt like those flaws came about of trying to tell a message. Whereas I don't feel like the CS games are trying all that hard to tell an important message, and maybe there's just some mistakes along the way of getting there. Where in a lot of ways I feel like the story of CS is trying to just kind of have cool stuff happen, and isn't as concerned with why these things are happening, or like what it means in the greater scheme of things. And it's disappointing because I think CS had a lot of opportunities, right? I kind of talked about this in CS3 and CS2, that, you know, the discounting of politics is a big factor, right? Like the introduction of the curse and the way it kind of downplays the corruptive influence of, like, authoritarian governments and nationalism. Because those themes are somewhat prevalent or somewhat in the game, but I feel like they get completely dropped in CS3 and 4. Same with, like, the politics of CS2 kind of takes the somewhat interesting setup of the nobles and the reformists, where the reformists, in theory, you know, they're kind of pro-democracy, but they're pro-authoritarian democracy, a nationalist democracy. And in theory, maybe, like, the idea that the nobles have a better vision for the country, despite having flawed views of the nature of who should be in charge, right? And instead, the nobles are reduced to being cartoon villains in CS2. And that sucks. And it just feels like in a lot of ways, the CS games kind of are averse to touching on some of the issues that previous games were, right? When it comes to like Azure and like the idea of like whether it was right to overthrow Dieter. Because even though he's a dictator, he in a way is kind of improving the quality of life of Azure, of Crossbell by guaranteeing its autonomy. And just like, you know, its exploration of power dynamics by rejecting the idea that someone, even if they're using the power for good, that the idea that someone could rewrite reality is too dangerous, because even if you have 99 good actors in a row have that ability, you only need one bad actor to throw it all to shit, or one unforeseen circumstance. And that in a way, the pursuit of perfection in life kind of can sap the meaning from it. And those are interesting ideas, whether or not you agree with them or not. So, trying to think, what else do I have written here? Other things with CS, I feel like, yeah, while there are a lot of, like, individually, like, there's cool stuff that happens, I do feel like CS in general also kind of suffers from not having any, like, amazing standout moments, in the same way that Sky and Crossbell did, right? Probably the closest, like, super cool holy shit was maybe, like, Osborne being Reen's dad. Like, I didn't expect that. That was a cool reveal. Unfortunately, I feel like not much comes of it. I feel like their relationship isn't really developed all that well. As I kind of talked about earlier, where Osborne, you know, never really treats Reen like a son, except for in the end, where he kind of pretends he was a dad. And Reen seems to accept that. You know, there's no kind of the shocking revelations like Sky had in terms of, like, you know, Joshua and Ren and Kevin's backstories. Now, that's also unfair, because the reason those were shocking was because the series had pretty firmly been, like, it didn't seem to go in that direction, so that hard turn into darkness that those character backstories provided, with, like, each one going further than the last, was surprising. And if you tried to do that again in CS, it wouldn't, just by nature, wouldn't be as surprising, because we've already established the series can go that far. With all that being said, though, to not end this section on a complete negative, I still think the games are good. Like, I think they're really good. There's nice moments throughout. It's got some great characters, some great development. The overall, like, high-minded, big-picture lore is interesting. I'm kind of invested in that aspect, even though I know I'm just setting myself up to be annoyed when nothing fucking happens ever. But basically, to close this section, I think that basically the flaws of the CS games when it comes to their own story, like, I think that's kind of, because I was kind of having this issue with the big plot where it's so slowly revealed that the CS games are not unique in this, right? I mean, you basically learn nothing about Ouroboros over the course of Sky, or, like, very little is learned in Crossbell as well. So it's not like the idea that the big plot is revealed so slowly is, like, something that's uniquely wrong with CS. But I think, like, some of, like, the fact that CS's, like, main stories had, like, all these issues made it easier to be annoyed when the actual big plot is revealed so slowly. And also, it's just like after 10 games, you're kind of like, come on, man, do something. Pokes with stick. Like, because I kind of think, if I think back to, like, how I felt about some of the, like, the vague, ominous bullshit in, like, Zero or Sky 3, which, you know, the series is somewhat mature by that point. And in a lot of games, that's, like, you know, most series don't get 3 games, right? You know, they contain their whole, like, big plot in that, in, like, a trilogy, if they even get that long. So, and I think when I was playing it, knowing that there was still, like, you know, 7 more games, you know, when I was in, like, Sky 3 or something, I was like, oh, you know, we're gonna know so much by the time we get to Cold Steel. And it's like, yeah, we know more, but, like, not that much more. So in that sense, it's a little disappointing, but I can't deny that the big picture plot is still engaging. I'm going to talk for an hour about theories in a little bit, so you got that to look forward to. And by a little bit, I mean right now. Fuck. Alright, the fun section. The no salt zone. The just fun speculation time. It's alright. I have several different weird intertwining theories that we're about to be presented with. To a degree, these are more based on things that I think would be cool / interesting, more than something I think will definitively actually 100% I'm betting money that this is what's going to happen. My theories have some holes, but granted, so does the main plot of these games, so, you know, maybe that just makes them more valid. One of the reasons why I do kind of preface this is more because some of my ideas are based on like the specific word choice used in the English translation, which is like very shaky ground to do the speculation on. So I'm treating this more as like a thought experiment on like research and creating and presenting an argument than an attempt at making a 100% accurate prediction of like the way I think the plot is going to go. This is more just kind of like talking about some things that I think are interesting. Some are definitely more like this would be cool, and there's a few that are like I actually think this is true. Alright, so the cutscene at the end of the game. The main takeaways are the name of the third phase of the Orpheus Final Plan, the Eternal Recurrence Plan, and the idea that the world will be ending in 3 years, and secondarily, the idea that basically everything that's happened has had a point to it. Everything that has happened, including members leaving and members dying, has all been in service of the greater prediction. So initially, when I started thinking about this back after beating the game, you know, of course was drawn to the Orpheus Final Plan, and particularly the word Orpheus. Now, that's not the first time it's been mentioned. I think they do call it the Orpheus Final Plan back in Sky 3, when they introduced it as the Phantasmal Blaze Plan. I think I was more drawn to the Phantasmal Blaze aspect of it at the time, but I'm pretty sure they used the phrase Orpheus back then, and it's been mentioned before this as well. So initially, I'm focusing on the Orpheus aspect, because that's the thing that jumps out at you. You're like, Orpheus, I know that dude. He played a harp and shit, or a lyre, or whatever. I don't know what it's called, man. But as I was thinking, I was kind of struggling. I'm like, I don't know. Like, you know, I was thinking about, you know, the few story. I mean, the most famous story of Orpheus is, of course, you know, him going to the underworld, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But as I was thinking about it, really, I thought about eternal recurrence. And I'm like, actually, I know that. I know that phrase. That's a thing. That's like a thing. And I started racking my brain for my college level ancient history classes. And I'm like, that's like a philosophical term. You know, I do my research and I'm like, it's a Stoic idea. The phrase eternal recurrence. It's an idea that's used to define this aspect of like early Stoic philosophy that the universe is cyclical. Every X number of years, the universe is cleansed, purged, and a new universe is created, and that new universe essentially repeats in the same fashion as the previous universe forever. And in that sense, all actions are predetermined. If you did something in a previous universe, your universe or yourself in the next universe will do that same thing in a nearly indistinguishable fashion. That's like a very base level idea of the theory. So there are some connections to that theory and what is presented here in this final cutscene. One of the aspects of eternal recurrence as a philosophical ideal is there's a definite end year of the universe, that it purges itself on a regular cycle. We know that the world will be returning to primordial nothingness the exact year, right? That's predicted. And another aspect is that the universe is cleansed via a purging of fire, as opposed to like a flood myth. It's, you know, specifically stated to be fire. Now, we do know that there is some other plane out there that may burn us from, that's heavily associated with fire. And he even gives Reen something called the primordial flame, you know, the idea of a fire that comes from nothingness. Right? The Grandmaster uses the phrase primordial nothingness. So how do we connect this to other stuff that we know? So we know you can't leave Zemuria. Now that could either be that... No, there's two kind of ideas there, right, that I have. A, there's a protective dome, so to speak, that is isolating Zemuria for their, you know, either it's you can't leave because the outside world is too dangerous and we have to protect you from it, or that you're being trapped inside for some reason or another, or it's that Zemuria is actually like isolated in like its own plane. And it's not that you can't leave because you're, you know, there's some sort of physical barrier. It's that there is nothing, so to speak, beyond Zemuria because you're in your own isolated planal dimension. Now, what are some reasons behind this, right? It could be that, you know, they're being trapped or they're being protected from something going outside, i.e. maybe some sort of universal cleansing by fire that a certain McBurney is a part of, potentially. Because like an idea is that Zemuria is being shielded from the effects of the remaking of the universe, and it's that like McBurn's people that he's a part of are maybe involved in that, instead of it being some sort of inanimate fire that consumes the universe. It's like an actual people who either wipe out the universe maliciously, or maybe it's like a sacred duty or something like that is an idea. It could be that in 3 years, whatever is protecting Zemuria from the ongoing cleansing collapses. It could be that the cleansing reaches Zemuria in 3 years and it can't be protected anymore. Maybe it's been hidden for a while. Maybe the whatever's protecting Zemuria is just meant to delay the inevitable. Now, there's actually another idea there that we'll talk about in a little bit. But that's kind of like the connections to the fire aspect of eternal recurrence. Now, another aspect of the theory that we see at play is the Grandmaster saying that everything that has happened needed to happen, or is predicted. Predetermination is a part of the theory, like innately. There's the idea that everything in the previous universe happens again in this universe. So it could be that the Grandmaster just has knowledge of what happened previously, and everything that happened there is happening virtually the same, and the actions of Ouroboros are attempts to try and create some minor small change to see if it can shake up the, you know, the permanent causality that ends in the universe being cleansed and Zemuria being destroyed and all that, by like trying to break this cycle. Another aspect of this, you know, the idea of maybe that Zemuria is being shielded from the effects of some sort of cleansing or destruction of the universe. Because there is, you know, the fundamental question that still needs to be answered in the series is where the hell is Adios, right? Everything about her depiction has shown that she's not shy about intervening in the affairs of humans. She was worshipped by the ancient Zemurians, so she's probably been around. She's not like an invention of the church. We know the Septurions are real. And that's like a direct interference on behalf of humans by granting them super powerful treasures. You know, she creates the Holy Beast, which are meant to watch over and directly intervene if necessary. So it could be that maybe she's using her power to protect Zemuria from some way, you know, creating a barrier, combining to some sort of plane. Either she's actively doing that, or maybe used up all of her power in the process. You have the question of what is the purpose of the Septurions. It could be that it's to guide humanity in place of her. Maybe she's willed herself out of existence by using all of her energy to protect Zemuria, or is actively using her energy to protect Zemuria and can't watch over humanity, and therefore the Septurions and the Holy Beasts were meant to look over them in her place. There is an aspect of like how Ouroboros reviving and kind of re-earthing the Septurions is still pretty unclear. I have a slight idea that we'll talk about in a little bit. But that's kind of like some of the big picture connections to the philosophical idea of eternal recurrence. Now, that's more of something that I think would be cool. This next two theories are more something that I think is slightly more likely, which is treating eternal recurrence less as like, this is like a real reference to this like really old philosophical idea, which is possible. The English script at least does have a ton of references to Greek ideas, right? I mean, the Orpheus final plan, Kia is called the Azure Demiurge or something, which Demiurge is like a Greek idea for like creator beings that are like, they have the ability to create, but they themselves are not creation gods because they're created by some higher power, which perfectly alludes to like what the Septyrions essentially are, where they're beings that have divine powers, but they themselves are not all powerful because they're created by some higher being. But like the other basic idea for the eternal recurrence, and this connects to partially, or it's alluded to by some of McBurn's dialogue, where when he comes to it, he gets his memories back. He has the line about how Ouroboros couldn't have chosen a more perfect symbol. So I've kind of mentioned this before, but I've never really put much thought into speculating over what Ouroboros could mean, because Ouroboros as like a concept is used in about every single culture, and it means slightly different things in every single one. So unless you have like an idea of which one they're going for, it seemed a little futile to try and prescribe meaning, but it seems like that line kind of confirms that it's Ouroboros is a loop in terms of like a continuation of time, I feel, is my interpretation, which would mean that Zemuria is in a time loop. And there's two possible theories. Either the church is doing it, or Ouroboros is doing it. We'll talk about the church first, because that was my initial idea. So what we know about the Septian Church is that fundamentally it seems like their goal of the organization is to prevent another great collapse. They hide technology, they hide the Septyrions, which is very odd considering if they worship Aidios, you would think the Holy Septyrions, her greatest treasures to humanity, would be a huge fundamental part of the scripture, and there would be like an effort to seek them out. But instead, it seems like the church is intent to just pretend they don't exist, despite the fact that we know they exist. And instead they focus just on the abstract Aidios itself instead of these holy artifacts that were given to people. And it seems to be because they know that humanity will eventually destroy itself again, that it can't be trusted with the Septyrions, that they haven't fundamentally changed. Aspects of this connection can be seen with Wiseman, where he's a former church member and he prescribes to that ideology. When it comes to the Oriel, I mean, ultimately the reason he's trying to use the Oriel is because he sees another return, like the Great Collapse, is inevitable because humanity hasn't changed enough since then, yet technology has started to advance to the point that they will soon reach the same level of the ancient Zemurians, but without any fundamental change in terms of humans' capacity for logic. He sees themselves as just creating the same thing again and destroying themselves, or like eventually, finding the Septyrions on their own, or getting to the point where they can replicate their power, and then would just destroy themselves. So it could be that the church kind of is manipulating the flow of time to try and cause stagnation. There's a lot of evidence of recurrence throughout the series, right? Just like, to a degree, that could be argued as just like thematic. There's stuff like, the War of the Lions and the way the Civil War kind of mirrors it. There's others that I can't think of. Definitely, I kind of should have wrote some of these down. But there are a lot of examples of like things being cyclical in the series, and the idea of like events are repeating, right? I mean, even just like the way the games are formatted, right? I mean, the same way that like CS3 and CS1 follow the exact same structure, same way as CS2 and 4. Now, I think that's probably just like game design stuff, but like you could make an argument that that's intentional, maybe, in terms of like theming of like how, because I mean, a lot of the examples of things repeating, right? Crow dying, fighting the Vermilion Apocalypse as to kind of mirror Arian Road dying and then coming back to life. That's another example of like a recurrent event. I lost my train of thought. I'm gonna be honest, I lost it. It's gone. The train of thought has left the building. But basically, so the church is trying to, and it could be they're using the time septurion to create some sort of mass, small time loop to cause like events to repeat. But there's also the idea from Sky 2, actually, that even just regular Zemurian tech was able to control time. From the data logs you find that talk about the sealing of the Oriel, it mentions that the second or the first seal placed on the Oriel was frozen in time temporally, right? When the seal is released at the end of Sky 1, that is releasing the temporal freeze in the Oriel. Because, they seal it away in the space dimension, and then they seal it away, they freeze it in time as well, so that it can't, leak out and influence from the other space dimension. And that's, the purpose of breaking the first seal in Sky 1, is that it allows that energy to leak out, and so they can access it with the Gospels to fully unseal it later with the tetrasilic towers. But, basically they specifically mentioned the idea that it's temporally frozen, so that implies that Zemurian tech is able to do that. So it doesn't even necessarily have to be that the church has access to the time septurion. It could just be that they have access to ancient technology they've been hoarding secretly to control time. I do like the idea that the church has access to the time septurion. It's one of those things that just kind of makes sense. I suppose that they would have access to a septurion, and that's one of the major ones left. And, the idea of, the 12 dominions and stuff like that, 12 hands on a clock. Trying to think, something else. But yeah, I guess the other idea, though, is that it's actually Ouroboros who are creating the loop. Right? Because it's either Ouroboros who's trying to break the loop created by the church, or Ouroboros is creating a time loop for reasons, as we'll maybe try and talk about here. Because one of the aspects, because I was originally drawn to the idea that it's the church who's creating the loop and Ouroboros is trying to break it. Because one of the aspects of Ouroboros, if we try and connect it to the idea of the Orpheus myth, and in particular the Orpheus in the underworld, which one of the aspects of it is that Orpheus is told not to look back. And, he looks back as he's leaving Hades, he looks back at the last second to look at fucking Eurydice, and then he looks back too soon, and then the gods are like, fucking pranked, bro, you got fucking totally pranked, she's back in hell now, see ya. And so the idea is that, it's a prescription or, prohibition on looking back. And you could interpret looking back as embracing the tech of old, which is definitely seems to be what Ouroboros tries to do, right? By re-uncovering the Septurions, they kind of spread technology with how they recreate older technology with the workshops and spread it out via the form of archaisms. But the other idea that I've kind of softened on after, and I only recently kind of came up with this idea when I was writing these notes, is that Ouroboros are actually the ones creating the loop for a more benevolent reason, which is that the trials of the Septurions, the idea of reviving them and seeing how humanity faces these potential threats, right, of these superpowered beings that can be easily misused, is that it's trying to see if humanity is ready to face this end threat in 3 years. And it could be that these, events have been repeating forever, and it's whenever humanity fucks up and doesn't rise to the challenge that the clock gets reset and we go back and try again. An example of this would be the first ending of CS4, where Reen kind of fucks up, potentially, by killing himself. It could be that Reen's, being alive is still important for, the one true plot that would actually see humanity ready to face whatever threat comes to Zemurian in 3 years. So there's the idea that they just keep repeating stuff over and over and over again, and that's why everything that has happened is important, because ultimately at the end, everything that has happened to these characters needs to happen so that they're in the right place and position and time frame and the same power level they need to be in 3 years when the super threat comes. And it could be that every time humanity fucks up, or they don't, they have to go back and they do it again. And so that's why everyone knows what's going to happen, is because of individuals like the Grand Master and maybe Campanella have experienced this loop many different times. And it would explain some of the okay, why Why are some of the members in Ouroboros so shady? Well, because we need those people to be there, and they need everything they do has to be done because it's all in service of creating the perfect timeline. And we kind of see this at play when it can still connect to the idea of multiple worlds. Now, the first obvious assumption with multiple worlds would be like a parallel universe type thing, which is probably what they're going for in all honesty. I'm presenting this more because I'm fucking tired of parallel worlds as a trope. They've become so unbelievably popular in the last like 2 decades that I'm tired of hearing about them. So I think a societal time loop is actually just more interesting to me, and I would prefer that. But I do think they're definitely kind of going more with the idea of like full-on parallel worlds. But if you think of it as each time loop, or each time you rewind the clock to try things differently, that is kind of a different world, and it would still fit in with the idea about observing what humanity does with each Septirion in each possible world that you hear from Campanella. I lost my train of thought again, man. But basically, it's that the idea that Ouroboros keeps looping time to try and create this perfect, ideal timeline where humanity is ready to deal with whatever existential threat comes in 3 years, whether it be, some sort of cleansing in the form of McBurn's people, just the straight up like demonic influences that you see at play towards the end of CS4. Right, where the idea that the stuff that happened in regards to the Ghosts of Melquest are not related to the Great Twilight, that it's, there's these cryptids and these evil spectral beings are slipping through. Whatever is, the plane into Zemuria, and that's like a potential threat maybe. It could be that in 3 years the whatever is protecting Zemuria ceases to exist entirely, and like the veil is completely torn asunder and they get flooded with demons, and only a humanity that's been able to successfully navigate the trials of the Septirions and not and like deal with these extra powerful beings would be able to like unite and be ready for this like cosmic threat is possible. So to explain it, how they're able to do this, it could be the Ouroboros of the Time Septirion, or it could just be the Grandmaster's innate power, which leads to speculation on the Grandmaster. And I've kind of already previously said that, I kind of like the idea that the Grandmaster is basically just Aidios, and Aidios isn't all-powerful for some reason or another. Either that her power level was exaggerated for religious beliefs, and like she was just maybe like a really strong magician or something, or magic lady, and then she became some godlike being over the years. It could be that she's actually a fragment of Aidios, that Aidios does exist and is an all-powerful being, but is preoccupied using her power for some other reason, destroyed her power, like, diffused it into the Septirions, which explains how they, have all that immense godlike power, yet Aidios doesn't seem to exist anymore. It could be that all of her power is into the Septirions instead. Another idea is that maybe she's just a shadow of the past, like with Celeste from Sky 3. There is a line that kind of implies that, where she calls herself a shadow, who's there to announce the appointed time. And it would make sense for ancient Zemurians to know about the ultimate end due to their causality machines. Another little thing I wanted to mention about, they mentioned that the name of the causality machine that writes the Black Records is called the Azoth, or Azoth, which, of course, the first connection is that's what the, Altina and Millium line are called, right? But it's also like, that word itself is actually related to like an alchemical concept, right? Like it's like supposed to be this like legendary material that like everything else is derived from, and it's kind of just a neat little connection to like the creation of the homuncula and like its association with alchemy. And I kind of think that could be what the Ars Magna that Mariabel refers to, is that it's actually a causality machine, because she has that line where she says the Grandmaster's existence is akin to the Ars Magna. And so I'm kind of thinking that since the Black Records has established that there's at least 2 other causality machines, that's maybe what the Ars Magna is. Either maybe it could be that it doesn't work entirely, or they don't understand how it works, because he mentions that she's still like researching it, but like that could be what that thing is supposed to be. Because I don't really know. I mean, I just know Magna's great. I don't really know what the R's is supposed to signify, but yeah, that's kind of my idea on the Ars Magna, is that it's maybe a causality machine. But essentially, to bring all the speculation to a close, I'm pretty sure that Ouroboros are going to ultimately be good guys, so to speak, like kind of air quotes around there. I kind of have a hard time seeing them as like a completely bad organization at this point. And I mean, I haven't really felt like they were going to go that way for a while now, but just some like additional, like going back on the dialogue from Sky 3 with the Anguis meeting, like knowing what we know about Aryan Road now, Aryan Road being so like reverential towards the Grandmaster is actually kind of interesting. Because it seems like she does seem to genuinely believe the Grandmaster has like noble goals. And if Aryan Road was really just joining Ouroboros for a chance to enact the Great Twilight so she could do her thing, it seems like she wouldn't actually play into the whole, like I don't think she's pretending to like the Grandmaster, because also I feel like the Grandmaster, based on what we know, would be able to see through that shit anyway, if she can like see the future to some degree. And then there's also Vita's devotion, where Vita's, you know, is obviously not really a completely bad person. So you kind of have to assume there's some sort of noble goal at the end of it all. And basically, this is the part where I got fucking tired and stopped typing. There's some more stuff to maybe talk about potentially, but I feel like I've pretty much laid out all my base level theories enough. Yeah, I think the idea that I like the most, or I feel like the most realistic, would be that Ouroboros are enforcing a time loop for some sort of greater purpose. It has the most clear connection to their logo being an Ouroboros, because I feel like if they were trying to break a time loop imposed by the church, their symbol would be like a broken Ouroboros or something like that, as opposed to one themselves. I like the idea of like and I mean, I think you can do both, where it's that they're creating a time loop to prepare humanity for some sort of cataclysmic threat that could be related to the idea of the universe purging itself in the eternal recurrence philosophy that I laid out earlier. And it could just be that, you know, it doesn't necessarily have to be related to McBurn either. Yeah, I just kind of keyed in on the fire aspect, but I can't talk anymore. My voice is dead. It's rebelled against me. So I think we're gonna go into wrap up territory. Overall, games are good. In the future, I would like to see the series become more grounded, or at the very least, focus more on what it's good at, which is characters. And the first thing I would hope for is, let's lessen the amount of characters in the game. I think that's another issue with CS, is that there's too many damn characters. And so I think in the future we should maybe have like a smaller, more refined cast. Or at the very least, if you're going to have a large cast, have it be complemented with returning characters who are already pretty much like, whose character arcs are mostly finished and they can just be added onto. But yeah, I think that's kind of my hope for the series, is it gets a bit more grounded. To a degree, I think that's going to be like kind of impossible though, just because like CS has blown the world open. And I mean, grounded doesn't necessarily mean like real, like I'm not saying you have to ditch all like the super fantastical stuff, because that's always been part of the series, right? But basically just like, I would like plot elements to feel like they have more thought to them, because I feel like just a lot of stuff in CS felt very random and arbitrary, and the explanations for them didn't exist because, well, they wouldn't make sense if they did, basically. So to wrap things up, in terms of future Trails stuff, I still want to do a video on favorite boss fights. Another one on S-Crafts would be fun as well. The problem with doing one on S-Crafts and like a tier list of all the S-Crafts, that would be a ton of fun. That would also be like a fucking immense undertaking that I don't know if I care enough to do, if I'm being completely honest. I would like to, but you know, I don't think it's like an easy list of like every S-Craft in the series created. So I'd have to like do it on my own, and I'm gonna be honest, I ain't got time for that shit. I mean, I do have time for that shit, but I ain't have got time to devote to that, if I'm being honest. But a video doing on favorite boss fights, I still definitely want to do. I think that would be a lot of fun. And it wouldn't be, I mean, it'd be like a lot of work because I would have to probably like reinstall. Well, I wouldn't have to reinstall the games. I think I have some of the, I mean, I saw the footage from most of the important CS4 boss fights. Well, something I think, oh yeah, the reason why I was thinking reinstall, something that I think would be fun is maybe like redo one boss fight, like my favorite boss fight from each game, like without the difficulty mod, just to see like, you know, what it's like in vanilla. Could be kind of like a fun little idea. I would only do like one per game, just not to like drag it out. That would be kind of interesting. That, of the bonus videos, that's like the most likely to happen. I can't guarantee it's going to happen because there's also entirely possible that the next Trails video you see from me is Reverie Part 1 in like a year. And I'm just going to be like freaking lazy as hell, and this is all you get. Because I mean, like I enjoy making these videos and like a lot of this bonus stuff, and they're just like, they're hard to motivate me to do because I'm just lazy, man. And it's just so much easier to just like, I'm just going to record, you know, a couple like Let's Play videos instead that are like a lot easier to do than spending a bunch of time on like prep and stuff. I do also still, I mean, I'm still kind of entertaining the idea of doing a Sky 1 like replay that's like super complete. We'll see. A lot of that will honestly really depend on like, you know, I'm going to do the Persona 5 Let's Play in October when that gets the PC port. So it would have to come sometime between after that and before Reverie. So it just would kind of depend on like my general mood. That's definitely something I'll do eventually. Just it may, who knows when it'll be. Because I still think that'd be a fun idea. And I personally want to replay the games and be like more like complete with them. So yeah, we'll see. We'll see. Let's call it. We're at like almost we're like 3.5 hours, I think, something like that. I think I laid out most of my stuff. I think I'm gonna stop talking now though. So goodbye. I'm all right. My Word document just crashed, so I think that's a good way to know that it's time to end things. I'm Extra Cheesy 87. Stay tuned for, you know, whatever the next video may be. Probably won't be Trails, but you know, then watch some other stuff besides Trails. There's good stuff out there, past and future probably, or not. You know, come back in a year when Reverie starts. Do whatever you want, man. Just enjoy the content. That's all I can ask. Goodbye, everyone.